But I'm Rob. I'm from Melbourne, Florida, and I'm a bonsai addict, I'll admit it. And I probably have 240 trees in pots that are showable. Not all the time, obviously. You can't always have a tree permanently showable. And since I retired in March, I just harvested another 140 Premnas from my yard. Does anybody have a Premna here? Yeah. I was the first American to have Premna in the United States. Because in 2004, I imported it. Pedro was also with me, Pedro Morales. I think you guys know him. So we were both in Taiwan. We both bought one. He went to Puerto Rico. I took mine home. And mine froze in the luggage compartment. And when I got home, I said, is it dead? But the roots still looked okay because they have to be bare rooted. So I put them in a pot and it made a sucker shoot. And from that sucker shoot, there have been thousands. And the original tree is only this big. Still. Well, I kept it show hand. But I have one that's 18 inches across at the base now because I've been growing them in the ground for 18 years. So this past year, I harvested another 140. That's a lot I'm not a professional bonsai artist. I am a rocket scientist, and I work for NASA on NASA contracts. I'm a mechanical engineer, but as I was telling Jim, that I work with the Japanese Space Agency, and I got to learn Japanese language, and I learned their culture, and then I got into bonsai tree. And my slogan is, bonsais are like potato chips. Nobody can have just one. You work on a tree, and you got to leave it alone. Otherwise, you're going to kill it. It's like if you had a dog and you trim the dog's toenails every day, the dog would probably bleed to death, right? So it's the same thing with a tree. And so you work on a tree, and then you get the itch, and you go get another one. You get another one, or you take a cutting. By the way, I'm Rob. You walked in a little late. What's your name?
Irving. My name is Irving.
Irving. Nice to meet you, Irving. So, and then with the Premnas, once I got Premna, I really love them. They call me the Premna King in Florida. So I've been doing it for 30 years. And I wrote a book about it because I originally wrote a book that was about the design of bonsai trees. I called it Emotional Trees originally, and I sent it to a bunch of publishers, and they all rejected it. And one of them was kind enough to write back and say, this is very interesting, but nobody's going to read this stuff. I said, oh, okay. But that publisher about 6 months later said, we had an author back down. Would you do an introduction to bonsai book? I said, I could do that. And they said, you got 3 months. And I did it. I only missed the deadline by 2 days. And I put out a Hey Rube, since I was president of BCI, as I was showing earlier, there's pictures from all over the world. So if you have the book, just pay attention to the little, I took that picture, so there'd be no credit. But if there's someone else took the picture and I have the tree, and so it's pretty neat that bonsai is popular all over the world. And a lot of the books that are out there only really relate to how Japan does bonsai, because that's what they know. But since I've been president of BCI and I had a chance to travel all over the world, I've actually been to every continent, either teaching, demonstrating, or lecturing about bonsai, and I have friends all over. I said, we need a book that addresses that. What I do in Florida is totally different what they do in New York. Probably a little bit different than what you do here, because like last year you had a really big drought and you had excessively high temperatures, whereas in Florida we never have a drought. That's why it's called a swamp. It rains at least every day, well, not every day, but pretty much every day in Florida. And so as I wrote this book, I kept that in mind. So like the inside cover is bonsai around the world. When I went to South Africa, the trees are totally different. But they had a coastal tree that looked just like a buttonwood. It wasn't a buttonwood. I wish I could remember the name of it. And I carved it and I did some good work to it. And then in Australia, which is an interesting place because it's kind of isolated, very strict import controls. Like I play golf, and when I went to Australia, they took my golf shoes out of my golf bag and I had to wait 40 minutes while they cleaned them. They didn't want any grass seeds on the shoes. And they're very particular about what trees they have, but they have Banksii, they have Australian pine, they got bottle brush. Some of those we have in Florida. So it depends on where you are, and not only does it depend on where you are, but it could also depend on your microclimate. What trees you grow in your microclimate, depending on, I live on a pond on a golf course, pretty close to the ocean. And I live south of Cape Canaveral, so the Gulf Stream comes up the coast of Florida and hits that Gulf Stream, and then it starts going across the Atlantic. So where I live, even though it looks like it's pretty far north, it's actually tropical. Whereas you go 30 miles inland to Orlando, it's temperate. And where I live is right below the tropical to temperate border. So I can get pretty good performance out of my trees because they're tropical and they have a long growing season. I tell people, if you want to be a downhill skier, you don't live in Florida. There's no snow and there's no mountains. If you want to grow trees, you want to live in Florida because stuff grows so fast. Now, we can't grow all the species. So I have a term for that. It's called zone envy. So I don't grow Japanese maples. I don't grow trident maple. I tried azaleas. Azaleas last about 5 years in Florida before they finally say, where is winter? I'm going north. Sayonara. So I just learned, I have bougainvilleas, I have Premnas, I have ficus, buttonwoods, elms. I can do Japanese black pine. I like Japanese black pine. And there's a bunch of other little podocarpus. Does podocarpus grow around here? Yes. Yeah, podocarpus makes, I think they make great bonsai trees. So, and my approach has evolved to bonsai over the years. When I first started, because I'm a Japanophile, I've been to Japan 32 times. I love going to Japan. And I kind of did the Japanese thing, but I kind of have a pretty good understanding of Japanese culture. And thought I had a good understanding, so I built a garden in my backyard with a path and a bridge and a stream, and I put a Japanese-style garden gate as you leave my garden, and I have a swamp behind my house, so that goes to the swamp. So Ben Oki, you guys know Ben Oki? He came to my house, and he said, Rob, do you burn crosses in your front yard? I said, no. Why do you say that, Ben? I'm not in the KKK. He goes, why do you have a Shinto gate in your backyard? I said, oh, that's not a Shinto gate. That's just a garden gate. But it was a classic misappropriation of misunderstanding of Japanese culture. And here I am, a Japanophile. And I've spent over a year in Japan and lived in Korea for a year. And I didn't paint it red, thank goodness. So then I started seeing all these people that want to put scrolls. What is the Shinto gate? Torii. Have you ever, Torii is the Japanese word for gate. So if you say Torii gate, you're kind of being redundant. But Shinto temples will typically have a red gate. It's 2 pillars. It's got a crossbeam and it's got another crossbeam above it. Yeah. And then the top crossbeam is usually arched to simulate movement to heaven. Oh, so I hate to say it, but have you ever been to EPCOT in Disney World? Yes. The Japan Pavilion, that big red thing they have in the lake? That is a Shinto torii. And there's a very famous one. There's very famous ones all over Japan, but there's one by Mount Fuji in that lake. What's that lake called? I actually made a painting of it because my wife and I, she finally went with me to Japan on the very last trip and she loved it. And it's in the water and there's a big mountain behind it. So when you do bonsai design and you try to copy the Japanese, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I do it all the time. But I don't stop there. To me, bonsai is an art. And so now when I style a bonsai tree, it's the same sort of approach. And because I live in Florida, a lot of the Japanese trees are not going to work for me. And so I have my, for instance, a banyan style. You ever hear of the banyan style? Jim Smith had the most famous banyan style in America. I got it in here somewhere. There. That's Jim Smith's banyan right there. It's kind of a stylized photo of it because I put it in Photoshop. And that's now in Venezuela. It's sold for big bucks. I don't know the exact amount, but it was a lot. Banyan style, you'd never see that in Japan. When they do have Ficus microcarpa in Japan, I've seen them at some shows, but they make them look like a pine tree because that's the rules they understand. Now, the other thing about Japanese style and pine trees in general is that, in my opinion, there's nothing natural about bonsai. When do you see trees growing in the pots in nature? They might be in a pocket, which is kind of serves as a pot, which stunts the tree. But for the most part, as soon as you put a tree in a pot and then you start manipulating it, it's not natural. It's an art form. So if it's an art form, you should try to devise an emotional connection to the tree. And that's the key thing. That's what's going to differentiate your trees from the craft. You need to come up with an emotional concept. As an example, my ficus here, I call it the Kraken. My design concept for that was a sea monster. So I wiggled the dingleberry out of every branch on that tree to look like a sea monster. And I show it naked. I always cut the leaves off when I show it because I want people to see the ramification. And then I have other trees, and I usually give my trees a name. So for instance, no one says, did you see Van Gogh's 400 painting? No, we've seen Starry Night, right? Or it's the Mona Lisa. So start thinking that way. Don't just do craft in your yard. Start thinking about what is my emotional connection. And then I've taken that to display. So I'm not just doing a stand. I like to make stands. I'm the woodworker. I've made all my own stands. This tree and the branch has got to go that way. Which way is the trees leaning? That doesn't matter to me anymore. What am I trying to do? I made a tree. It's a Chinese elm, and I designed it to look like it's in the middle of a field, like the cows are coming along. And ever see how the bottoms of trees are totally flat because the cows eat what they can reach? And then I showed you last night, I photoshopped that picture onto a field, and I'll let you make the testimony. Did it look like a bonsai?
It looked like a beautiful tree in nature.
It looked like a tree in nature.
How you did that.
So here's another thing, being a nerd engineer, and I believe that if you want to know what good bonsai are, you have to look at them. That's why I put them in this book, but I have a big library of bonsai trees. The albums from Japan and from Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, I've been to all those places. I study them, and I get my calipers out. And I looked at, because I like black pines, I looked at all the Japanese black pines in the Kokufuten albums that I have. 90% of them were either you think taller or wider than they were tall or wide. What do you think? When you look at a pine tree in the ground, they're pretty tall when they're fully mature, right? Unless you're looking at in the Alps where they get stunted by snow. In Japan, in those exhibitions, 90% of the Japanese black pine trees were wider than they are tall. It's not what most people would think. Pine tree is supposed to be tall. But because bonsai is not natural, you're stunting the tree, and the way pine trees grow, they're going to get wider. Now, tropical trees, different story. Tropical trees are always wider.
You're talking the foliage or the trunk?
The whole canopy.
Okay.
Not the trunk. The trunk. If you have a trunk that is as wide as a tree is tall, that's a separate style. I actually talk about that in my book. It's called the sumo style. In fact, I open right to it.
Oh, wow.
Take a look at that tree with my mom sitting next to it. That's a sumo tree. That was in Japan. That tree's trunk is as wide as it is tall. It's big. My mom wasn't that big of a woman, but that tree's about as big as my mom. And so that's a sumo style. I'm not talking about the sumo style. I'm talking about like, well, here's an azalea right here. See how that tree is so much, it's wider than it is tall. That's a very common affliction that happens to bonsai because of the techniques we use to dwarf trees. The only time you really get away from that is when you do the literati style. The literati style is trying to replicate the ancient Chinese paintings where the men of letters, that's what literati means, person of letter. The Japanese word is bunjin, Chinese word is wen ren. The first character is man, the second character is writing. So without much further ado, as I do, I'm going to like to work on this one, okay? I'm not sure that I'll finish it because there's a lot, unless someone wants to help me wire it. But we can talk about these two trees, and why I kind of want to do this one. This is a crepe myrtle, and it's a clump style. And I think I told some of you guys earlier that when I moved from Houston, I lived in Houston for 4.5 years when I worked on the space station. I brought like 20 crepe myrtles to Florida. And it turns out, I guess I didn't know this at the time, that crepe myrtles are not as broad a distribution. They do like certain regions. There are crepe myrtle varieties that do better in Florida. And of the 20, only one lived. And I put some on the ground in my yard. They weren't confined to a pot. They all died too. So I'm not a big fan of crepe myrtle. The other problem with crepe myrtle, in my opinion, is they flower on the edge of the branches like this little guy right here. And so you have to have a design goal when you design a tree. Are you making a sea monster? Are you making an alien looking for, I have a tree in here somewhere, it's an alien looking for people to eat? Or are you trying to emphasize the flowers of like my cover? If you were to take all the leaves off this, the flowers off this tree, this is a bougainvillea, the foliage would probably look like a mess. Not the foliage, the branches. But the design goal for this tree was to show the flowers. Now, does anybody remember of BCI? Bonsai Club? Did you notice the issue, not this current one, the current one's a very good issue too, but that had your Houston show in it. But the issue before that, they were showing trees in China, and they had 3 bougainvilleas that were in the magazine with no flowers on them. How unusual is that to put a bougainvillea in a show with no flowers on them? See, that's what I mean by studying the trees in these books. I don't just look at the pictures. I go in depth. I measure the aspect ratios. I'm looking at where the pads are in the negative space. They were styling them to do the ramification, and they were doing a lot of clip and grow, and it was pretty interesting. I actually wrote an article about that on Kempinski Corner. I said, this is not your father's bougainvillea. Now, your design goal could be put flowers on a bougainvillea. And so the approach to designing the tree is going to be totally different if you're building it to look naked. Okay, these are vines. They're not really trees. And so if you want to get the flowers, and they're kind of like the crepe myrtle, the flowers are going to grow on the tips. And so if you want to get the flowers, you got to let it get a little leggier. If you're going to, so that's, what is your design goal? This design goal would be, this would be like a 10-minute workshop. I would just whack, 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 pick a couple, it wouldn't be all that interesting. And the end result wouldn't be that satisfying, in my opinion, because a bonsai has to have a couple of things. It's a tree, so it has to have a trunk. That's what differentiates bonsai from a regular plant. It's a tree. Although there are some things, like a bougainvillea, technically is not a tree. It's a vine. But look at that trunk. It gets to be fat. Whereas, even though we live in Florida, nobody does palm trees as bonsai. Do you know why? They're not trees. Palm trees are big pieces of grass. They don't have cambium. They don't have deadwood. Everything in the palm tree is like a tube that's taking water to the top. It's just a big piece of grass. A big piece of grass. There's one in my neighborhood that's probably, I don't know, 100 feet tall. I think it's the Washington variety. So it has to have a trunk, and this trunk is kind of neat. And if I was going to do this tree, I would really stump it, and I would go for a short, wide thing with one of the branches would be top, and then there's really no low branches, so there'd be nothing to wire. You'd have to wait for something to pop. So like I said, it'd be a very quick demo. Boxwood, I tried a couple of boxwoods. They don't like my neighborhood. I collected one that was about 100 years old from my sister-in-law's mother-in-law's house in Meridian, Mississippi. And I brought it home, and it lasted about 2 years before it gave up the ghost. They like cold weather. So this one's kind of in the same boat. I like clump styles. I have several clump styles. And, but again, I think this would be more satisfying. We could get more to a finished product. And I've always wanted to work on one of these. One of the guys, Mike Cartret, had one in Florida, and he actually lived in South Florida. I don't think long-term it made it. It looked pretty good for a couple of years. I tried Rocky Mountain Juniper in Florida. I tried 2 of them. It was only $900 for the tree, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And now I have a Rocky Mountain Premna. You know what I did? Once the tree died, I didn't throw the deadwood away. I made a tanuki. Have you heard the term tanuki, phoenix graft? It's when you have a dead trunk and you carve a little groove in it and then you put something else in there to grow. So, but like most things in Florida, because of the wet, dry, the deadwood on that Rocky Mountain Juniper is rotting away. So we're going to try to do this Texas Ashe Juniper. Very interesting tree because it is native to Texas, sort of. They're not really sure exactly where it's. And some people say it's the one-seed juniper. Are you guys anybody have any of those? They grow a little bit further west. There's a guy in Dallas that had knows of a farm guy in New Mexico, and he collected 100 of them. Big ones. I'm talking world-class, massive trunks at Renaissance Gardens. I forgot his name, but I think he may be out of business. But he had a bunch of one-seeds. These are related to the one-seeds. And they can make nice bonsai trees. They do get leggy. And has anybody ever grafted on these? Do you know? It's one of the solutions to a leggy tree is to do grafting. I've done grafting on San Jose Juniper, which I have one, and I have a Juniper parsoni. And I've even tried grafting Shimpaku onto the parsoni with no success. Shimpaku, because I live right close to that water, the Shimpaku don't like my yard. It's just not cold enough. Even though it might be 10 miles inland, it might be a little further. So we're going to work with the Juniper, and we have to come up with a design goal. Now, one thing I like to do is should do this to understand the audience. Yeah, I talked to you yesterday about how many trees do you have, and how long have you been doing bonsai? Tell me how many trees you have and how long you've been doing bonsai.
I've just been doing bonsai for a year.
And you have 200 trees?
No, but
She
I
has
do
a lot
have
of
about
plants.
70.
You're a gardener type and you get into bonsai? Okay. That's a dangerous situation. Our vice president, you see all those things on the internet, I got to buy plants or whatever. I'm not a gardener. I actually don't like gardening. I pay a guy to cut my grass. I'm more of an artist. I like doing stuff with my hands. How about you? Mm-hmm. Same boat? About a year and you have 100 trees and a lot of cactuses. You only have 2 bonsai trees?
No, 200.
200.
Kidding.
Don't kid. I have friends that have 500 trees. I mean, not unusual to have that many trees in my circle of friends.
I like succulents. 'Cause
Jay, what about you? You've been doing it a while since you're going to California, right?
Yeah, I've been doing bonsai for 24 years now, and as far as bonsai trees go, I figure I have 15 or 20 bonsai trees, and then I've got another 50 or 60 plant materials that I'm working.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty good restraint for that.
He's definitely lying.
He's got way more than 15 bonsai.
Yeah.
If you're doing a show and display, you have to be lying.
Fly your pants on fire.
I'm with Vicky. I
We've
agree.
seen this stuff.
Every time new stuff.
The reason why I think he might be fibbing is if you go to a bonsai show and you see a big tree, it has visual impact. It's kind of like if you go see Venus de Milo or Guernica. Guernica is a massive painting, has a lot of visual impact, or the Pieta. And a bonsai tree, a little one, a shohin, small tree, because I try to avoid using Japanese words if I can, a small tree doesn't usually have the impact of a big Rocky Mountain juniper or something. The way you get around that is you make a group display. And so the group display is now maybe 3.5 feet, 4 feet, and they have all these, in Japan, allegedly all these rules. In China, none of those rules. In Florida now, in my neighborhood, none of those rules. I actually made a display where I took white illustration board, I cut out a Japanese lady, a Japanese lord, and a priest. I cut a slot, and they're all got a piece of wood out, and they're all holding a bonsai tree. There's three, and it relates to a Japanese no play. And that was the display that I did. But I gave it more visual mass because they were life-size cutouts. So the people were about this big would fill up this whole table, and so we could compete. So when you say you only have 15, you have to have multiple specimens. You have to have different shaped pots. The pots have to be different colors if you're going to do the Japanese style. One's got to be going this way, one's got to be going that way. They all got to be in decent condition to show at that time. So to do that, guess how many show-in trees I have? About 100. And I'm a pothead too. I like, not the marijuana kind, I like bonsai pots.
You need at least 50 trees.
And lately,
to put together a shohin stand, a full Fuji box. See, I'm just showing an Aso stand, so that's like 4 trees in mine. So
okay. Well, I made my own stands like that, and they're pretty nice, but I don't use them anymore. I like to do creative things with them. I've done the Japanese and the Asian way. So let's see, how about you, Irving? You can admit this, we're all in the boat together. If it's a lot, it's okay.
50, I guess.
And how long have you been doing bonsai?
I started in 97 back in the Philippines, but I stopped
Okay.
when
Philippines is on my bucket list. It's one country I haven't been to yet. I want to go. Next month, I'm doing a bonsai program in Ecuador, in Quito. And since we're down there, I told my wife, let's go. I want to see Machu Picchu. That's been on my bucket list. And then next week, my 40th anniversary, I'm doing another item on my bucket list. I'm going to go see Falling Water in Pennsylvania, the Frank Lloyd Wright House. It's falling apart, supposedly, so I figured we better go see it. Well, it's got a stream running through it.
Right.
You know it's going to corrode. But I'm looking forward to that. You were, wait. Anyway, I forgot your name.
You know, my name tag. though.
Jane, that's right. It's like such a complicated name.
That works too.
She's in every book I read as a kid in school, Jane and John.
That's me.
How many years?
Like a month.
A month.
Almost 2.
A month, it's
2 months.
Oh, well, then you need to get my book. It's not
She's
quite a
my
beginner
daughter.
book.
She's my daughter.
Oh, she's your daughter.
Yes,
Okay,
we
well,
came together.
that's great. My daughter wants nothing to do with my bonsai trees.
Oh, no.
She lives on her own. She doesn't live far, and she does water when we're on vacation. I got to do the trees again. I have to go every day. But you know what? Maybe I finally made a database of all my trees, and last weekend I put a little tag on all of them because I had so many, I couldn't keep track with what I had. And I give them names, and they're like, which one was that again? Was that Red Storm Rising, or was that, Two-Face or whatever? And so, and the reason I did it is, I said, I'm at the age where I got to think about keeling over. I said, if my wife's younger than me, I said, if I keel over and she sells those trees for what I told her I paid for them, she's going to lose a lot of money. So now she's got the database with the price and she can negotiate. Yeah. How about you?
I've been after it about off and on for over 30 years, but only serious once I got here and joined this group of folks about 10 years ago. I got over 100, 120 maybe. You-
Okay.
They're kind of like Jay's Total Group. They're not all ready for show.
Yeah. Well, it's on. And by the way, of my show-ready trees, I would say 20 of them that could go in a show right today. But the rest of them, like I have a Nia, a saltbush, Nia buxifolia, that's been in a lot of shows. But right now, it's got a 6-foot branch on it because I'm trying to thicken up a branch. That's not my goal in a demo. My goal is more to take a phase 1 material. Phase 1 is raw material that's never been styled. It either just been collected or it's a nursery material or whatever. And in that particular case, you're trying to set, by the way, I didn't ask you because we talked last night, so I know your background. You're trying to set the trunk and maybe figure out where the main branches are going to be and maybe what your design concept is going to be so you can grow into that design concept. Because when you do a bonsai, you're not doing today, like for instance, does anybody do oil painting? No? Like in the old days, one of the techniques was they would make an underpainting of oil in like either brown and white or maybe black and white. It's called the Giselle or something like that. And that would dry, and then they would start glazing the colors over it. The Impressionists got away from that. The Impressionists, like Van Gogh, they would just put paint, and they would paint in one session. But in the old days, they didn't do that. It would take months to do a painting. Bonsai is even more than that. When you're in phase 1, like this is a phase 1 tree. By the way, when was this collected? How long ago?
I collected it in February, I think, or March.
Of what?
It was this year.
Oh. It's okay to work on it? I would never work on a tree the same year it was collected, and I'm in Florida.
Yeah, it's been in February, at the end of February.
All right, that's going to temper.
A little more sensitive on it.
That'll temper my approach. I have to be really sensitive on this tree, and maybe what I'll do is make a drawing of what it will look like and do some of the beginning work. That's phase 1. Notice the pot is a little bit bigger, or that's a pretty big pot. We'll talk about pots in a second. Phase 2 is once the trunk is where you want it and the main branches are set, now you start working on developing branching. We call it ramification. And ramification, I never really understood why ramification was used for bonsai trees, and I decided to look up the word, and it comes from the Latin word to mean consequences, but the consequences come from branching. So like if you commit murder and then you run away and rob a bank, there's a lot of consequences that develop from that, and that's where it came from. I actually wrote another Kempinski corner about that, and it was just the introduction to how you get ramification on a tree. Once you get the branches where you want, the ramification started, you get to the refinement. That's when you put it in a smaller pot. I'll give you an example. I have 2 podocarpus trees that I grew from a seed 15 years ago. I put one in a small pot its whole life. I put one in a pretty big pot, and then I put another pot underneath it. So when the roots finally got down, they grew through the hole and into the bigger pot. And then I have a friend that used to swim for Ohio State. He's got the longest wingspan you've ever seen of a guy. He's like 6'1". His wingspan is at least 2 feet more than mine. And I said, Bruce, when you can no longer touch the top of this shoot, that's when I'll cut that one off. And I grew 3 sacrifice shoots on that tree. Have you heard the term sacrifice branch? When you want to get something fat on bonsai, you got to let it grow wild, and then you cut it back. Now, a pine tree is a little bit different because they don't bud back that well. It's a whole other technique. But you can still do sacrifice branches on pines. Once that's all done, you put it in a smaller pot. And whenever you put a tree in a smaller pot, you constrain the roots. The roots are going to grow tighter, so is the foliage going to grow tighter. So does anybody have sea hibiscus in your collection? Everyone's saying you got to get the red stem to get small leaves. No, you don't. Once you get the branching where you want, don't repot it. It is the fastest root producing tree you'll ever find, but once its pot gets so pot bound, the leaves will go whoosh. So if you look at my Facebook page, about 3 weeks ago, I took a picture of a sea hibiscus leaf in the ground. It's about 9 inches across, and mine are like that. I have the red stem, and I'm experimenting with it, but I don't think it's necessary. I think with good technique, you can get the leaves small. Finally, when everything is where you want it, now this is when you start worrying about getting the leaves smaller. If I want to get a sea hibiscus and I want to get a nice fat trunk, I don't get it pot bound. So the goal at this stage is not small needles or small leaves. That's when you get here. That's when you start doing techniques. The techniques to get small leaves on bonsai trees stunts them, and they don't grow as vigorously. Make sense? So that's why these phases are so important. And then there's always a phase 5. Anybody know what phase 5 could be?
Display?
Well, stage 4 is when you're going to put in a show. Everybody,
Recovery
Everybody's probably, maybe if you're brand new, you've only been doing it a month, you probably haven't killed a bonsai tree yet, have you? There you go. Don't feel bad. John Naka, allegedly, I never met him, but allegedly he's quoted as saying you got to kill 1,000 to be a master. I haven't killed 1,000 yet, but for instance, this past year, my well, I got a new well, and it went very deep. I'm not sure why they went that deep. And then I noticed my grass was dying, and some of my pine trees, they died. I lost probably 40 grand in trees. And what's going on here? Is it climate change or something? I said, I better check my water. My well became the seawater. I must have a microcrack from my well to the ocean. I was putting 3,600 parts per million of salt on my trees. I was basically watering with the ocean. So now I fixed that problem and everything's coming back, the ones that are dead. So anyway, everybody kills bonsai trees, and that's what thing. But also notice that cycle can go back. Now it doesn't always have to go back to phase one. It can go back here. Definitely this happens a lot. So when I was in Japan, I'm pretty sure the picture's in the book somewhere, the oldest bonsai tree at Kato's nursery has been a bonsai for many hundreds of years. It may not be the oldest tree, but it's the oldest bonsai tree. When I saw it, it was just totally overgrown in a big pot. Well, guess what they were doing? They were taking it back maybe to zone 2. They were resting the tree for 2 generations. So even Kato's son wasn't going to work on that tree. And we don't have that problem in America yet because we really don't have generational bonsai, but you do. So that's pretty cool. By the way, I don't know how old you are, but I will guarantee you with good bonsai technique, your bonsai trees will outperform the stock market. Because I'm at the stage now where I need to start liquidating and I'm selling my trees, and my wife is shocked at the value that I'm getting from my trees. I'm talking multi-$1,000s for trees. When I go to Pennsylvania next week, I'm going to visit one of my trees at Longwood Gardens. It was at the National Exhibition. You went last year, you said?
Yes.
Did you see the Australian pine raft? Do you remember that one? I misread the instructions and I got there late, so I almost didn't get in the show, but Bill cut me some slack. Normally he wouldn't. So my trees didn't get judged, but I was okay. I'm not really worried about the judging. But a guy came up to me and he said, I'm the curator of the Longwood Gardens, and I really like your Australian pine. Oh, thank you very much. By the way, that tree gave me a hernia. And so it was on my list. It's very heavy, and it's like 65 pounds, and I'm by myself, so being a knucklehead, I picked it up. I'm like, that doesn't feel good. So he said, is that tree for sale? And I said, I don't know, I guess everything's for sale. And they bought it. And they bought the stand, too, because I made a really cool stand for it. And next week, I go check it out. I'm going to Longwood Gardens. They're doing a renovation. And I was going to work on it, but my wife said, this is our anniversary, no work. So I said, if you want me to work on it, I'll pay my own way back up there and I'll work on the tree for you, but I don't want to get divorced. 40 years have been a good marriage. So anyway, enough yakking. This is an Ashe Juniper, and we need to come up with a design concept. So the first thing we want to do is look for a front. So let me ask a question. I mentioned Mona Lisa earlier. Has anybody been to the Louvre? No? Oh man, it's my favorite museum. Well, no, the Air and Space is my favorite. Louvre's number 2. The Mona Lisa's there, and you're hard to get close. Like it was at that wall. Looks pretty good from the front. How does it look from the back? Doesn't look like anything. But again, if you walk down the hall and there's Venus de Milo, she looks really good from the front. Looks pretty good from the back too. Depends on what you like. I don't know how women feel about it, but not too bad from the sides. So is this a painting or is this Venus? This is a sculpture. So even though a bonsai tree has a front, it should look good, at least from the back and from the side. Now, it's not always possible. Nature has got infinite variety. But as you design a tree, you should think about that. So that's one thing, like I have a presentation about how you display trees, and we almost always display them with a backdrop because that's what a tokonoma is. And I won't get into that, but I do a kitchen display in my house. I have a kitchen island like this. The sink is here, and the family room is there, and the refrigerator and stuff is there. And since I work out of my house, I put one of my stands there, and I always grab a tree off the yard, and I put it right on this little thing. When I wash my hands, I see the tree. But when I walk this way, I see the tree. And I appreciate it from both sides. And then my wife complains, there's ants in the kitchen now from your stupid bonsai trees. But that's the price you pay for art. I squish them. So the first thing to do in selecting a front, this was just collected. I'm going to go very light. So just as something I discovered too, by the way, if you're doing a lot of workshops and stuff, make your tools look different. So these are American Bonsai tools. They're made in Melbourne, Merritt Island, Florida. I dip them all in that stuff you can buy, like I bought it in mail order, and then I put some tape on them because I do so many workshops and I've lost so many tools, and I've had other people's tools too. Like, this doesn't feel like my tool. Then at the convention this year, we had a guy that had some kind of machine that could etch the tools. So he put my initials and he put a little bonsai. You have a machine that does that?
No, I had American Bonsai do the etching on mine. They put my chop on one side
Yeah.
and my initials on the other.
Yeah, American Bonsai, they're made in China, so they're still imported, but they're designed by him, and he's a local guy. He's a little bit interesting, but I like to support him.
What did you dip them in? You said you dipped them in something?
Yeah, it's called tool dip, I think.
It's a plastic coating.
Plastic coat or something like that. And it's very common in electrical tools because they try to give the electrician a microsecond of life before they get electrocuted to insulate them. It's not going to stop 40,000 volts, but and it doesn't last forever. You can see it's starting to chip or whatever, but at least I stopped losing tools this way. So the first thing we're going to do to pick a front is we want to consider the roots. And I'm just going to gingerly, by the way, this looks like pretty water retentive soil. But I do see the white stuff's pumice, right? Yes. So I was understanding that most of these will grow only in pumice when you first collect them. But
I've tried it in 100% pumice, but I feel like they dry out so much.
But yes, right, you were in San Antonio. The ones that I've seen are in the Dallas area.
Yeah.
They're
We try
Dallas.
to get as much native soil as we can.
Yeah, because I know about these, I don't have one, but I know that you got to have a lot of native soil and the roots go way over and you got to gradually reduce them. And
This one had a lot of roots, and I actually spent like a good amount of time pulling it out.
how did the root flare look? Because I don't want to really mess around too much.
It was out, but there's like some long roots that were just circling. I just put them all in there.
The reason you check the roots when you first get a raw material is the roots are the toughest thing to fix. So for instance, I said earlier that I had an oak tree that I grew from an acorn 30 years ago. And if you ever grew an oak tree from an acorn, the acorn becomes kind of like a potato, a tuber. And then the tree grows from that. So when an oak tree is young, it has a very lopsided root structure. The Japanese word is nabari. So to solve that, after it became about 5 or 6 years old and I moved to Florida, I got other live oak seedlings and I just drilled a hole through the roots and I root grafted other tubers to it. And now that tree's got awesome root spread. It's 30 years old too, of course. So we're not going to let the roots determine the front because we can't see them and I don't want to really mess with the tree, but that's okay. In a lot of cases, collected junipers don't have good roots. And in a lot of cases, junipers in general do not have good roots. Maple trees, trident maples, ficus trees, they're going to have interesting roots. The design goal for most junipers is the deadwood. Because the way junipers grow is one root here is connected to one branch. They have very little cross-branch movement of the sugars that photosynthesis create. That's why they compartmentalize very well. So if a juniper gets damaged, like this is damaged right here, you could follow that live vein down all the way to the roots. And I could see it goes all the way down there, okay? And so you have to keep that in mind when you work on the tree. I had a juniper femina that was cascade style because it got knocked over by a hurricane at a nursery. And when I bought it, it had this really ugly root sticking out of the top, but I didn't mess with it because I hadn't repotted it yet. And it was in a pot like this, and I brought it to a Bring Your Own Tree workshop with a Japanese master, I'm not going to mention the name, and he's going from tree to tree. And he goes, ugly root, boom, cuts it off. Guess what? That was the only root on the tree because the rest of the stuff falling over. And that tree just, in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it looked like this. So you have to be careful with the roots of a juniper, okay? So let's see. The other considerations then for the front are going to be, number one, where is the trunk going? What is the line of the trunk? So this is kind of This is upright. This makes a very sharp angle, almost 90 degrees. This is really close to 90 degrees. You got some subordinate branches down here. Then you have a secondary trunk right here. And that is characteristic of, let me borrow this book for a second. That is characteristic of Ashe juniper. Pretty good. No spider mites. Whose book was this? Okay. I got spider mites on your tree. I haven't seen a spider mite in my yard I can't remember the last time now. Because I don't have a lot of junipers, but pine trees can get them too, and I don't have them on my pines. I think the secret is I spray the foliage on my trees, keep them wet. All right, so the design goal is when you're a beginner, your design goal could be keep the tree alive. That's a good design goal. I would say that's a decent design goal for at least 2 years when you're doing bonsai. You got to get through a couple of seasons to see what are these things doing. And that's why you have to have patience. What's that?
Cricket.
It's a cricket? Okay. It's a Texas cricket. Everything's bigger in Texas.
Sorry.
You know, you do commune with nature when you're doing bonsai. Like I had a podocarpus. It's always evergreen, right? And I don't have weeds on my bonsai trees. I'm a big proponent that these are art. You don't go to an artist, they don't have ketchup spread on the painting or whatever. Everything is neat. So if you're going to have a bonsai garden, you should have a display area where you can enjoy your trees. You could have your little developmental area. I got that. But at least have some of the trees in a nice display so when people come over and you can enjoy them. So many gardens I go to, freaking mess is a sad way to say it. The trees are full of weeds. Don't do it. So if you have too many weeds in your trees, probably means you have too many trees. And you're not paying attention. Bonsai is all about attention to detail. So every morning I go out, I don't even take the tweezers, but I do leave tweezers by my back door. Stainless steel is good. I actually have 2 scissors I leave in my garden. They're carbon steel, and I left them out there accidentally. And I leave them there to remind me, check for your tools, because they're rotting away. One of them's almost turned to powder. So it's been out there that long. So what we're going to do is, it's only been collected this year. So, okay, the goal is when you work on a bonsai tree from phase 1, particularly a juniper, don't remove more than 30% of the foliage. Because other than that, this foliage is doing the sunlight photosynthesis thing. It's sending sugars down to the roots. The roots are absorbing the water and minerals and whatever, and they're exchanging stuff. So if this tree needs to grow roots, it's been disrupted from the ground and the roots have been disturbed. So these sugars that come from here are going to be what the roots need to put on their development. So we don't want to remove, I might even remove less than 30% on this tree. And then have me come back in 2 years and I'll work on it again. And by the way, you should always have a horizon for your bonsai trees. And for instance, a black pine tree from raw materials, typically in Florida, 5 years before you can really have a decent tree. And the nice thing about bonsai is it's the only thing where I know in life where you can buy time. Think about it. I would love to go buy Tiger Woods' golf swing, right? Play golf like Tiger Woods, can't do it. I just got to practice, practice, practice. But in bonsai, you can buy a nice tree. And then you can work on it and put your style on it. Now, they're not cheap, and with inflation, nothing is cheap nowadays. But if you're getting into bonsai and you're getting tired of just the little sticks in a pot, buy a nice ficus tree. They're pretty much indestructible. Get a nice jade so that you're getting immediate feedback and learn how to maintain a finished tree, because every one of those phases I talked about require different maintenance techniques. When this tree becomes phase 5, the maintenance technique is going to be a lot different than the techniques that I'm doing today. For instance, I don't think you should have a lot of wire on a tree in a display. Some wire is okay. Never will you ever have a guy wire on a tree in a display, in my opinion. And not everybody has that opinion. I was a judge at a show in Italy once, and I'm looking at all these trees, and they're gorgeous imported trees from Japan, because they can import with no problem. Every one of them's got a guy wire, and I'm saying if a tree has a guy wire, it means it's not ready for a show. The branches need major movement. There was this one Scots pine that looked like somebody took a full-size tree and put it in a shrinking machine, The needles were super small, no guy wire, they're beautifully done, very little wire on the tree. I gave that the award, and then the next day I was kind of looking at it again, and sure enough, had like a 3-inch guy wire in the back. So I said, all right, I didn't see it, but I'll make a special exemption. So, by the way, do we have wire? If we don't have wire, I'm going to switch to the Crape Myrtle. Because we really can't do much of this without wire. I don't want to really prune it too much. See, like, oh, and his big thing here? Not too much. Well, I'll keep talking about the tree, and maybe the wire will show up. So the design concept for this could be, I'm driving to San Angelo. I did this once. I was in Austin. I had to drive to San Angelo. That was a long drive. By the way, I had poison ivy, and really a bad case of poison ivy. And one of my coworkers, she was in the car with me, and I'd be driving along, and on my wrist, it's getting itchy, and she would yell at me. She's worse than my wife. And so that was a miserable trip. I remember that. But I remember seeing the Ashe junipers for most of the way. Once you get to San Angelo, it becomes more desert. And they kind of grow in the field by themselves. They kind of grow as a clump. And they didn't really look ancient. Because the most common design goal in bonsai is what? Make the tree look, it's a 3-letter word, old. Why is that the most common design goal, you think? Any opinion on that? I think about this kind of stuff because I'm a nerd. I think the reason is that trees age differently than humans. They have cambium. Cambium is their stem cells, I believe. This is my opinion. And I thought about going back, now that I'm retired, back to college to study trees, just to learn about cambium. Because I figured if we could figure out why the cambium can always make something new that the tree needs. It can either make a root, it can make bark, it can make a leaf, it can make a branch. It can differentiate. Whereas our stem cells, they go away once we're born. They differentiate to what we need, and then we got what we need, and very little, it may change in shape, but very rarely does our human body create anything new once we're born. Teeth might be, I think you still have teeth buds when you're born too. They're just little tiny microscopic things. So the cambium is what's growing on this particular tree, and when you look at them, to look old, the trees don't want to look like upright clumps. That looks juvenile. So if you study ancient trees, they've been hammered by the weather, so they typically have scars. Even deciduous trees, by the way, it's a whole other story. I visited Sherwood Forest and saw the really old trees there. They're hollow, their branches are sagging. So if we wanted to make this tree look old, we're going to have to bring these branches down, or we're going to have to get rid of the upright stuff. And one of the techniques I do in workshops when I want to cut off a branch, I'll take a little piece of wire and I'll wrap it just around the trunk, and I'll say that gets cut off in 2 years. And so it reminds people what they need to do. That way we're not killing the tree. I could try to be macho and style this whole thing, and then next month this tree would be dead. That's not the goal. In reality, we shouldn't be working on this tree at all. And maybe we should just talk about it, and I'll make a sketch of what I think it could look like. And then I'll work on the Crape Myrtle. So I really am not here to kill trees. And my ego is not big enough where I feel like I got to wire this all down and put the raffia on it and bend the heck out of it and make it look interesting. It's just too risky for a new tree. However, in looking at this tree, this branch I like. Even though it's very low, it's already horizontal, or more or less. We can work with that. And that's why I was asking about grafting. I could prune off all these little, here's a nice shoot right here, okay? By the way, you know about juniper berries? You know what the big role they play in our society? The big role that juniper berries play in our society, anybody know? That's how you make gin. Gin is vodka that's been soaked in juniper berries. And so I'm not much of a drinker, but this past year I went on a bourbon tour with my buddies, and this one distillery said, yeah, we're making a lot of vodka because you can make vodka and sell it right away, whereas bourbon has to cure, I think, for 3 years. And then they started talking about the berries, and I always knew that it was done, so I did some research, and it turns out there's a place in Canada and a place in Romania where people go out and pick Every little berry. There's no way to really harvest them other than do it manually. So it's kind of weird. But once you get your ash, they make a lot of berries. Get some vodka and soak them in it and see if you make some gin. Doesn't take long. This branch is already low, and this is the closest bud. No, wait. I better put my glasses on. Remember, I said 5-year plans, right? Aha, we got a nice little bud right down here. This bud is critical to the design of this tree. This one is somewhat critical as well. These will not be in the final design. But we're going to leave them here because they're going to keep this branch alive. We're going to let this branch grow. It's not much of a bud. It's just a teeny little shoot. So normally with Shimpaku or Parsinai or San Jose, you get what I call an armpit bud. The buds will form right in the branch union. And normally when a tree is in phase 3 going to phase 4, you take those all off. But when a tree is in phase 1, armpit buds are your best buddies. That's why I say the techniques vary depending on where you are in the phase of your design. I have had many trees, junipers, where I only have 2 now, but I've tried many over the years and sold them or gave them away. The armpit bud became the new branch. Because junipers will bud back, but not reliably. Not like a ficus, not like a buttonwood. They don't bud back when you cut. If I were to cut the ficus right here, I'd get 6 buds right at the cut and everything would bud behind it. That's just the way they are. Junipers are not that way. Has anyone ever grafted Ashe juniper to get buds down low? Do you know?
We have a hard time with Ashe junipers here, collecting them sometimes.
Yeah.
And so we don't know what to do. There's
So
like
you,
2 guys that
Gabe, you're young. You got plenty of time ahead of you. This is your future right here. We could start with this one, but eventually that guy grows. And then you cut it back and you make a dead branch. Everybody calls it gin, but like I said, I'm trying to avoid different gin. That's gin with a J, not the gin with the G. That's the drinking one. Maybe we should have a mint julep afterwards. All right, so we're going to keep this branch. So a fundamental design in bonsai is your number 1 branch should always be your fattest branch. Why is that? Because the way trees grow, they start at the bottom, and the number 1 branch is usually one of the first buds they make. And so it has the most time to grow. So if you're going to make an old tree, your number 1 branch probably should be the fattest branch. Doesn't have to be, because maybe that number 1 branch got hit by lightning 100 years ago, and now there's another number 1 branch. But for the most part, if you're going to follow the general rules, your number 1 branch should be your fattest, and it should be a huggy branch. So your number 1 should be, from the front, it should be pointing sort of towards you, and if it's an old tree, the number 1 branch is coming down. There's many exceptions. For instance, ginkgo. You probably don't grow ginkgos here. But you do grow ginkgos?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I can't grow them. But one very common design of a ginkgo is the flame style, where all the branches make like a flame. So those aren't sagging down. That's the design. However, I was in a temple in Kyoto, and in the middle of the temple, they had a 900-year-old ginkgo. It looked nothing like the flame ginkgo. It had a very low branch. It looked like a live oak. And it was fall. My wife was with me, and it had all those yellow leaves. It was absolutely magnificent. And ginkgo's weird is once those leaves decide to go, they all fall in one day. It's a very bizarre tree in that regard. I don't know why they do it, but I guess it's like groupthink. Hey, it's time to go. So this is our number 1 branch, or actually, since we're still evaluating the tree, this could be a twin trunk. We could actually keep some of this length, maybe this one right here or this one. We could take it out and then wire it up to be a twin trunk. That's always an option. Mother, daughter, father, son, whatever you want to call it. This branch is low enough to be a twin trunk. This one is dead. So remember I said old trees have deadwood, so we probably will keep that for now. This one is dead, but it's wimpy. And this one I feel comfortable cutting off because it's not doing anything for the tree and it's not doing anything for the design. If you have too much wimpy dead stuff on a tree, it makes the tree look juvenile. Even though trees in nature that are old will have these, we're not replicating nature. We're trying to make an illusion of something that's old. It's a big difference, okay? So as we evaluate that tree, we now have first branch. We got to think about the planting angle. You always want to consider planting angle. For this particular tree, you really don't have many options for planting angle. If I were to change the angle, it'd be challenged to come up with a good design. Although, I have an American elm. I call it the ray gun because it goes all that way, and it has multiple branches. It's kind of like a slanting broom style. You could possibly do something really crazy and make that all go that way, like it was windswept or something. You could get creative. If I were to be here long enough, maybe you could do something like that. That one I haven't looked at long enough. That one would be hard to change the planting angle because it makes just a beautiful natural clump. Always consider planting angle. This one needs a planting angle change. And the reason is, let me put it on the turntable. Ah! I'm getting wimpy in my old age. All right, you're looking at potential front, right? Now look at it. What is that trunk doing? I'm at the front now. What's that trunk doing? It's leaning backwards. So when a tree leans backwards, it creates the feeling of instability when you're looking at it from the front. But if you look at it from that side, it's leaning towards you. If it leans too much, these are going to be into the front. They're going to get foreshortened, and it's going to destroy the illusion of taper. So in addition to trunk and branch placement, the next main factor with the tree, thank you, is taper. Taper is starting fat and getting skinny. If you look at any tree in the wild, that's a mature tree, it's going to have a lot of taper. By the way, a really ancient tree will not probably have taper. It will probably have reverse taper, just like old humans, we get reverse taper. Since my hip surgery, I've gotten some reverse taper. I need to lose these 15 pounds I gained since my surgery, and it's not coming off. It's really annoying. All right, the dead ones we know we can safely get rid of. Anyone want a souvenir? So anyway, we have to pick a front. And we got to change the planting angle of this particular tree. So it's always good to have wedges. I didn't bring my whole toolkit, so thank you, Ryan, for bringing me some wedges. This one's going to take a pretty radical change. Ugh. So one thing I like to do is when I want to change the planting angle, and since I have so many trees, to help me remember, I'll do something like this. I normally use survey tape, but I have some green tape here. This is an indispensable tool you should keep in your bonsai bag. The stretchy floral tape. Like everything, it's getting outrageously expensive. I think it's like $7 for a roll of this now. It used to be $2. All right, I got one of these Ziploc bags that doesn't open. What the heck is going on here? There we go. It's like an IQ test. Okay, so maybe you can, I'll show you. No, I do this because I'm by myself all the time, so I'll show you how to do it by myself. I want to change the planting angle. And there's two ways I do it. I'm going to change the planting angle to be like that. Now I got this main trunk doing a little bit of a bend. And think of the Japanese, how they like to bow. So now my tree is bowing, and I got a huggy branch to the left. In a typical bonsai design, you're going to go left, right, back, or you're going to go left, back, right. Or flip it around, right, back, left, back. Any combination of that for the first couple of branches. And the number one branch is going to be your fattest branch. The number two is going to be skinnier. The number three is going to be even skinnier. Once you get above that, anything goes because it's nature. It could be, this is low enough to be a twin trunk. If this was like the second branch, that's now about 9 inches. Okay, that's pretty good to have your first pad. And then the second pad would be maybe back here. That looks like it's broken, unfortunately. Maybe got moved, broken in transit. I'll take a closer look at that. And then something in here is going to be on the right. And then breaking those rules is where the artistry comes in. I would say a third of my trees, and this is no BS, the number one branch is in the back. Because that's just what the tree had, and for the roots that are there, and it's not the end of the world to break a rule. In fact, I like breaking rules. Even though I got a top secret clearance and all, I've never been arrested. I break a lot of bonsai rules. And I'm sure most of you guys have been speeding on the highway and stuff, so everybody breaks rules every so often, right? They won't admit to it. I'm on camera. I don't speed. I have a cheap car. It can only go like 20 miles an hour. So that's going to be the front. However, I think it's going to be pretty unstable to leave it on the wedges like that. So what I'll do is I'll take a piece of tape and I'm going to find a branch. I think we're going to go at least this high. Well, I'm not going to really prune much. So I'm going to put this tape Let me put it down so I don't drop it. And I'm going to use the tape like a plumb bob. You know what a plumb bob is? It shows vertical to a carpenter or a mason. So I'm going to say, that's my new front. Ah, shucks, didn't last. Need to tie a better knot. So that way, if I don't get a chance to repot the tree now, or when I'm working by myself, I'm getting the pot ready, all the soil's off the tree, the planting angle has been screwed up, I kind of lose track of where I set the branches. I go back and look at my plumb bob, and then when I put it in the pot, with pink floral tape, pink survey tape, we're very effective, okay? And then I got my new planting angle. So here, from my angle is vertical. It's going to look weird, but again, we're phase one. That's straight up and down. So I'm going to tie it to this little branch. Well, I have to be careful because I can also change the planting angle this way, right? So since that's my twin trunk and number one branch, I think I want to take this tree over this way just a little bit. And the reason is these angles, we'll talk about these in a second, but these are kind of abrupt. If I move the trunk just a little bit, it becomes more of an upright angle. See what I'm talking about with these two angles? Now, every man here have hair? Do you have hair?
A little bit.
Okay. I don't want to insult anybody, but a lot of guys that are losing their hair do the comb over. This is a comb over in bonsai style. Two branches, one above the other is never good. They grow like this in nature. This is proof that they grow like this in nature. But notice what happened to this particular branch. There's no foliage in here. This foliage all died because this branch above it is shading it. So in nature, a comb over happens. It obviously happened, but see what the bottom branch did? It said, hey, I need some sunlight. I'm going out there. Okay, I'm leaving the house. And now it's become way too leggy. So in a design world, since this will become the new apex, this becomes another future dead branch. This is out of the design. So to show that, let me finish doing the green. So I want to change the planting angle like this. So that's kind of vertical right there. I'm just going to tie it to this branch. And particularly since this tree is not going to really be styled today for its health. I love the tree, by the way. You want to sell it? Yeah. Everything's for sale. Nah, I think it would be a death sentence to take it to Florida. The one thing that this tree probably will not like is humidity. When a friend of mine tried a California juniper in Florida, and I said, don't do it. Oh yeah, my cousin has it. It's a great tree. I said, don't do it. Dead in a year. Just too humid. They grow in deserts. You can't expect a desert. That's not too tight, but you get the general idea that that's kind of the new planting angle, okay? Now another way you could do it is, I saw some wire in there. Whoops. Yeah, see, that's what I'm worried. It's a little bit unstable. Is that the wire I'm supposed to use down in here?
You're going to use it out of my bag. The wire.
We're not going to put much wire on this anyway, so. This tree's probably 4 hours of wiring when you do want to wire it. How many people like to wire? You newbies got to learn how to wire. If you look at Japanese show books, or in the magazines, they occasionally have pictures. I have a lot of Japanese magazines. If you look at the trees from before World War II, they don't look anything like the current Japanese bonsai design. They were much more like the Chinese. They were much more natural. This whole concept of trees that look like poodles with the manicured foliage, that happened once wire was adopted. If you go to Asia and you look at like garden trees, they don't use wire in garden trees because they're too big. They use bamboo and string. And you'll see you're from the Philippines, you've probably seen that, right? If you were looking, maybe you weren't into trees. But when you do bamboo and string, you don't really have that much control. So everything is much more natural. And by the way, it's kind of nice. I think these junipers with the pads that are perfectly flat, I wrote an article also about this, is like the poodle of dogs. I had a Karen Terrier, like Toto in The Wizard of Oz, the way you groom them is you just pull their hair out and you leave some hair and you don't. And so natural is okay. Wire changed all that. And it's nice to have some trees that look that way and some trees not. In fact, Sylvia Smith, who just won an award at your show, she just put a posting on Facebook. She said, here's a beautiful, well, I think it's a beautiful, she didn't say beautiful, but here's a pine tree I grew from a seed in 20 years and it looked really nice, and I'm showing it without wire. Why would she say that I'm showing it without wire? Why do you think she said that? I think she's trying to make a point. Says all of us, all these guys that have these bonsai trees that have the perfectly manicured foliage, the only way they're doing that is using wire. And they're putting, so if you have like your magnet, your compass, and you walk through the show, it's not going to work. All that wire is upsetting the magnetic field. So she's saying this tree was trained. It has been trained so well that without wire, it looks gorgeous. And my Japanese black pine tree that you see in this book, there's no wire on that tree. When I take it in a show, I cut all the wire off. It becomes a little more rugged. It doesn't look like a poodle. It's the Karen Terrier of a bonsai tree, and I'm okay with that. I like that. So another way you can show the front and the planting angles with what I call a gun sight. You take a piece of wire. Has anybody fired a rifle? We're in Texas. Everybody's fired a rifle, right? So you take your gun sight and then you line it up with the bead on the front of the rifle, and that's where the bullet's going to go, more or less. It's going to go down with gravity. So if you, and this is important for me when I'm doing a demo to show the front like this, because in the heat of battle I frequently forget where the front is. So I would take this, and since this planting angle is going this way, I would plop this in the ground like that so that the flat part is at the new angle. So since I'm tilting the tree this way, it's going to go in the ground like that. Now the problem with this technique is when you repot it, that's going to disappear, because you're going to knock the soil off, and that's why I like to use the survey tape. It's not critical on every tree. You're obviously not going to do it on a show hen, because the show hen small tree, it's too small. You can eyeball that, okay? So, all right, now we got this particular branch, which this is the future of the tree right here. I know it sounds silly, but I've been doing bonsai long enough, and I'm patient. That's why I'd be a good doctor. I have a lot of patience. Bad joke. No, I really don't have a lot of patience. That's why I have 240 trees, because I work on this one. And I have bought finished trees because I wanted a finished tree. And I like what an artist has done or something along those lines. This is a dead branch, so we'll just clean up some of it so we were doing. So now we're going for an old juniper, not necessarily an old ash juniper, because old ash junipers still look like clumps, Christmas trees all grown together. I've played golf in Utah and in New Mexico, so I've seen the really old junipers. They always have deadwood. So that's the next thing we're going to investigate. This is going to become deadwood because of the comb-over feature. So when that becomes deadwood, we're going to peel off some of the stringy bark, because the stringy bark is a characteristic of the ash juniper. Not all junipers make the stringy bark. And by the way, in Japan, a lot of times, almost to the point of absurdity, they will clean all the old bark off the tree. The theory I've heard a couple different theories, is that the stringy bark, where'd that little piece go? This stringy bark is not in scale with the full-size tree. If this was a full-size string of bark, it'd be 4 feet across or so, right? So that they're claiming that getting rid of the bark makes the tree look more reduced. However, I've seen it taken to the absurds where the first bonsai show I went to, the very first juniper I saw, the guy painted the live wood red and he painted the dead wood white. And it was like a barber pole. It was that obvious. And I said, I don't like that. And he might have, a lot of people read stuff in books and they misinterpret it. I did it. I read Herb Gustafson's book when I first started on that oak tree. And Herb, who no one has heard from lately, I don't even know if he's still alive, he wrote these little 7x5 bonsai books. There's like 3 of them. He said you can hammer a tree. You can take a hammer and hammer the bark of the tree, and that'll disturb the bark and it'll get fatter. Okay, I got hammers. I'm a carpenter. I do woodworking. I get out there and I'm whacking on my live oak. And I whacked, and that darn thing to this day has got a big hollow where I whacked on it. So I obviously hit it too hard. Dude, I would suggest don't do that. I've never done that to another tree. And I have to figure out, I'm not like Microsoft. When you get a bug in your software, you turn it into a feature to sell it. I got to figure out a way to turn that into a feature. So we're changing the planting angle, and what we're going to do is, remember how I said this branch is dead, so there's deadwood in here? We're going to create a ribbon of deadwood using a tool like this. By the way, these are the Kevlar gloves. After 6 trips to the emergency room, my daughter says, when you're using sharp tools, you got to use these. I'm on the frequent stitch program now at the hospital. My next 6 stitches are free. So this is a very safe tool. You can buy these at Woodcraft. You probably have Woodcraft in San Antonio. They're called Flex Cut. They sell 4 of them in a kit. It used to be $50, probably $100 now. But you'll get 2 different gouges. You might get 3 different gouges, depending on which one you get, and you get a V gouge. You don't want the V gouge for bonsai. But you can just come in here and without very minimal risk, I've never got cut with one of these, so I don't need the gloves. You would just come in and peel the bark. Now there's some other more advanced bonsai tools. I think I can do this safely without damaging the tree. There's another really cool tool. American Bonsai is now carrying them, and I don't get paid by him. This little thing. It's like a bandsaw blade that someone bent and then they just sharpened both edges. And it's like $30. So when you come in here, and I have to be really careful. I don't want to hurt this tree. You can come in here though, and it just does a nice job of peeling off a little section. Now when you carve a tree and you make grooves in the tree, you want to be cognizant of the fact that it's not, you don't want it to look like a human did it. So when you carve the tree, that's why this kit is nice. You're going to get 3 different size gouges. But how many people use the rotating tools? You probably do it, right? Oh, we got a lot of wire. Have you tried using like a Dremel yet? Any of you new beginners? I know you have because you've been doing it forever. I have, because I have every tool known to humankind, I have a 4.5-inch angle grinder with a chainsaw blade. That's pretty scary. Chainsaw rotating at 22,000 RPM. Eye protection, gloves, be careful. Never got hurt on that one, thank goodness. I have something like a Makita electric die grinder that I have a samurai bit in it. That's about maybe a 1/4-inch groove. I have a Fordham tool, which is the flexible shaft with the foot pedal, and I have that. I have the Proxim little grinder. That's a very safe tool. I would highly recommend that if you're just getting, you get a Dremel. Dremel's pretty safe. You're not going to get too hurt with a Dremel. And the key with rotating tools, whenever you turn it off, do not let go of the tool until it stops spinning. Because the tool can do a lot of danger even though it's still coasting down. Like Dale Kochoy, who's no longer with us, had one of those Makitas and he put it down while it was still spinning. It crawled on the table. And what height are tables? It snagged his blue jeans and it went right to his you-know-whats. And luckily it stalled out before it got too much damage. But I bet you there was a pucker factor in that little scenario. Also, rotating tools can be dangerous. Another artist, again, he's alive, so I won't mention a name. He was using a grinder and the tree had wire on it. Never, ever use a rotating tool if the tree has wire on it because he hit the wire and the bit disintegrated and it put a hole in the wall. Now imagine if it hit a spectator, take out an eye or kill somebody. So you have to, bonsai does require some degree of caution. By the way, simple stuff like spraying chemicals. And you should be cautious when you do that. You should read the material safety sheets. You should follow precautions. I put on gloves. I usually put on rubber boots when I spray, and sometimes I'll wear a mask. And obviously sharp tools are dangerous. And as I mentioned earlier, picking up. You could get hurt just picking stuff up. It can be expensive. They don't have to be. The pots are smaller. So the pots aren't as expensive, although lately, and I like American-made pots, and they're starting to go up in value too. You can get away with more in Shohin trees. You can break all the rules, and you can use much more colorful pots because they're not as gouty. If you had a big pot, yellow with flowers and all that stuff for this tree, it's going to look kind of gouty. But if you have it in a small tree, it's just part of the thing. So that's why I have 100 small trees. I just like small trees. And I make my own pots, and my kiln is not that big, so it's easy to make small trees. All right, so this is going to be a gin. So what I'll do is I need some wimpy wire. My wire cutter. Oh, there it is. you collect trees? Has anybody else collected trees?
Right? 200 of them?
What do you guys collect? What species?
Next with this pickup.
Well, obviously you collected an Ashe Juniper.
Ashe, Juniper, cedar elm.
Cedar elm is very common. I have one cedar elm that I bought from that guy in Copel, Texas.
That Crape Myrtle was collected.
Crape Myrtle, landscape collecting.
Boxwoods, Yopon.
Yopon holly. In Florida, every house in Florida has a Yopon holly in its front yard. And I worked on 2 really big ones in Lake Charles. So when you see a little piece of wire on this tree, everything north of that gets cut off. So, but not this year. So I'm going to put this little piece of wire right here. I'm not wiring the tree, I'm just making a little relatively unobtrusive thing.
So you would cut it right above that? Or you put
Right at it.
Right at it.
With some trees, when you cut, you need to leave a stub to let it dry back. Does anybody have Brazilian rain tree? With the Brazilian rain tree, when you cut it, don't cut it right where you want the final cut to be. Leave at least 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. It'll shrivel up after a year, then you can cut it. Because remember, I think I might have mentioned, and pardon me if I repeat myself because I've done a lot of programs in a week, trees know how to compartmentalize themselves. This is compartmentalization right here. That's how they live. They don't have people putting cut paste on them. I stopped using cut paste. I think cut paste is a waste of time because you're basically just defeating the tree's natural ability. Band-Aids work on humans for the most part. Although lately, the few times when I had my surgery on my hip, I didn't get a Band-Aid. They didn't put a bandage on it. They just, they glued it together. They didn't even have stitches. I'm like, aren't you going to put a Band-Aid? No, we don't. I had a wrapping on it because the first couple of days it was oozing, kind of gross. But I was shocked that I didn't get a Band-Aid on this. I got a scar like that on my leg. So technology has changed, even with humans. Anybody in the medical field? You could probably explain the rationale for that. No? Okay, good. But I'm on videotape, so now some doctor's going to go, Kempinski don't know what the heck he's talking about.
I gave him a Band-Aid.
I use Band-Aids. I use Band-Aids all the time. I'm old-fashioned. If I get it cut, I want to protect it. Okay? So we're going to cut that there. This is history. But remember, this is going to kill all of this right here. So, but that's good. You know why? We already have deadwood here. So this branch, notice how this deadwood is going up to the bottom, and then this part right here is feeding the rest of this tree. This is the live part. This part is a dead part. This one is eventually going to become all dead. That means this is all going to die. And I believe that it's going to do a little twist, which is nice. That adds interest to the trunk. So because this tree is not that fat, the carving on it should really be done with this kind of tool. And the way you do it is, see if I can find a little spot to do it without hurting the tree. Where's those glasses? Are they on my head? Nope. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm at that point where I sometimes can see and sometimes I can't. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to take a little piece. That one I cut a little bit. And when you carve, particularly junipers, because of the way they grow, you want to carve with the grain. Because wood grows in tubes, and the length of those tubes is what the grain is. If you carve against the grain and cut the tubes, as the wood dries, it's going to crack anyway. And it's not going to really look natural. Now, occasionally a tree gets hit by lightning and tubes do break. But there's some people will take the Dremel tool and they carve all these grooves across the deadwood. There's a famous artist that does that. Not natural. And in Florida, when we get the wet, dry, that just rots off anyway very quickly because it's all superficial. So what you want to do is you want to pick up a little fiber. You want to take, these are gin pliers. These are specifically designed to do what I'm doing. Notice how they only meet in a tip. Whereas if you go to Home Depot and buy an electrician's pliers, that jaw is going to meet along the whole jaw. And so it's not good for what I'm about to do. When it only meets in the tip, it gives you some control. So I come in here and I'm going to grab that little piece of fiber and I'm going to pull it down. And see what I did? That shaving went with the grain. So if you keep doing that little by little with the grain, as the wood dries, it's going to look natural. But as the wood gets really old, it starts to crack across the grain. I call it an alligation pattern because it looks like an alligator skin. If you ever look at the remains of a piece of wood that burns, you notice it kind of looks like the back of an alligator. That's just accelerating the aging of the wood. And so, but when you start with, like when you do this branch, you could start with a Dremel and make a groove, make it twist, because you want to repeat the design. So that's another thing. We talked about taper, we talked about line, we talked about branch placing. Negative space. Negative space is the space that's not there. This tree, the design concept, has very little negative space because the design concept was show the flowers. But there is some. See this black right here? That's negative space. When you look at a pine tree, we'll just pick any old tree in Tony Tickle's raft. That's negative space. That's negative space. So notice, this negative space is bigger than this negative space, and that's bigger than this. Just like the branches get smaller to the top, the negative space gets smaller to the top. So another concept is taper. We talked about taper already. But rhythm is another important design feature, okay? Rhythm, what do you think rhythm means in bonsai design? In music, it's pretty obvious. It's boom, 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 right? I don't know nothing about music, but I kind of know what rhythm is. What would rhythm be in a bonsai design? Any idea?
Repetition?
Exactly. Rhythm is repetition of form. See, you got a lot of potential. So this tree is kind of mostly upright. If I were to make all these branches then come down flat and all at the same angle, it might be a little discordant because I'm destroying the rhythm of the tree. But in reality, since this is going that way and that's going that way, you may not want to have all these branches hang down. Or for instance, this is not a wiggly tree. I like to put wiggles in my branches, but I wouldn't wiggle this tree because the rhythm would be off. The trunk is not wiggly, so why should I make the branches wiggly? So another aspect of rhythm that a lot of people miss is the scars. A lot of bonsai people say, put cut paste on and let this scar heal, particularly with trident maple or Japanese maple. They don't want scars to show. But what did I tell you about Sherwood Forest? Old deciduous trees, not mature, ancient deciduous trees are loaded with scars. They are hollow. They have scars everywhere. They may have a dead branch, but they don't last forever. Deciduous, nothing lasts forever. So another aspect of rhythm is if you carve a groove and you make a spiral, then you should be making spirals here. When you make the pads come down, if you're going to make a tuft here, try to replicate that here so that the tree has a little bit of harmony. However, you may want to make a discordant tree. Like they had me do Houston gave me a melon seed ficus. And it had no branches on one side of the tree. I said, ooh, it's going to be tough. So one thing I said is, let's make a raft. Let's just, you know what a raft is? When the branch like a tree falls down on the ground? We can make a raft out of it, but we didn't have a pot to do it in, so we didn't do a raft. But I said, another idea is, let's make a model of a building and make it look like this tree is growing right next to a building. If you got a defect, make a run with it. It's non-traditional, but I've seen a ficus in China that's growing on the side of a wall that they built. Because that's what ficus trees do. They have there's a strangle fig. We ended up doing the Florida style. I just cut everything off. I did some kerf and bent the branches down, and we took all the aerial roots and spread them out. So we took a 3-inch trunk and made it 9 inches by using straws and wire. I actually wired all the roots, which I said, I've never seen anybody wire the roots before. So rhythm is an important concept. Another important concept in bonsai is color. So how does color feature in a bonsai design? You're a gardener. How would color feature in a bonsai design? Any idea?
As far as pots to...
Pots? Pot to tree is one big aspect of color. You're familiar with the color wheel? So when you have dark green, the opposite side of the color wheel, dark green is red. That's why almost all junipers are in a reddish, unglazed pot, because it's the opposite side of the color wheel. But if you have a bougainvillea, like this bougainvillea, it's pink. The reason they use the blue pot is it's the other side of the color wheel. So if you have a tree that makes a flower and you want your design concept is to show the flowers, then you pick a pot that's going to be complement to the flower color. If you have a tree that makes really good fall color, I don't think you get fall color here, do you? This might get fall color, right? So if you have a tree that has fall color, you might pick a pot to do the fall color. So again, that design concept is so important for when you think through. This tree is going to be white deadwood and always evergreen, so probably a red pot. And should it be glazed or unglazed? Everybody says unglazed for junipers, but why?
Because you have the rough texture of the tree and you want a smoother texture in the pot.
But smooth would be glazed. Glaze is really smooth.
No, I was saying glazed.
Ah, but see, that's just the opposite of the curve. See, that's why you have a lot of potential. You really already thinking the way an artist thinks, not the way a craftsperson thinks. And that's kind of the main message I'm trying to make. This, if you really want to take this to the next level, if you want your trees to somehow end up in the Museum of Modern Art, that's kind of my goal. I don't think I'm going to get there, but I want trees to be displayed as art, not as, oh, it's a helmet on a stick. And by the way, I have lots of helmets on a stick because I've been doing them for 30 years, and I'm not going to throw them away. But my new trees, like I took a tree, a ficus tree that was a forest, square pot, and when Laurent Derriot came, the cosmic bonsai guy, I said, what do you think? He says, we got a Home Depot bucket, 5-gallon bucket. We filled it 2/3 with pumice. I don't have many nice rocks because we don't have rocks in Florida. We have sand, which is good for digging, but lousy for root over rock. I put a rock that I had in the pumice, and I put more pumice in. I put the ficus on top of the pumice, and we wired it to the top of the Home Depot pot. Doesn't look like, that was a finished bonsai. That bonsai has been in shows before. And then the concept is the roots are going to go through the Home Depot pumice, surround the rock, and then we're going to put a little pot on the bottom, and then I'm doing the cosmic to all the branches on the side. And this thing is going to look like it's suspended in midair with a rock, and that'll shake out all the pumice. So the rock will be trapped by the roots, and it's going to look pretty darn cool. And by the way, 1 year, and the roots, they already cracked the Home Depot pot. And so that's the good thing about Florida. Stuff grows so fast. And I really like Laurent, and he and I hit it off pretty well. I took him to the Space Center. I said, you want to see cosmic? I'm doing cosmic, but cosmic engineering. And he landed the space shuttle. He was so proud. He got the space shuttle to land on the simulator. I crashed it. I ended up inverted in the Indian River. That's why I'm not an astronaut. Good thing. By the way, what about those 4 astronauts? Polaris Dawn, is it, I think? Wasn't that something? A commercial entity launched 4 astronauts, and everyone says, oh, they didn't really leave the vehicle. Well, let me see you do a spacewalk. Let me see you get on top of a controlled explosion, go 400 miles above Earth.
I'll do it.
Subject yourself, well, you better get the right equipment. Subject yourself to a vacuum. Live in microgravity, zero gravity. One of them I heard was very sick the first 2 days. That's why there's no pictures. By the way, that happens to about 25% of the astronauts cannot tolerate zero gravity. And they can't go up again. They're always seasick. It's not great for your body. But anyway, being a rocket scientist, I love that kind of stuff. My daughter now works for Blue Origin, and one day she said, she's not technical. She's an English major, but she does quality. She said, some people talk politics at dinner and some people talk sports. We always talk space, and look at that, I'm in the space business. She didn't realize how proud she made me feel when she said that. She's getting good money, too. She's single, if any of you guys, are you single? I'm always looking, I can always hope. I need a grandchild. Somebody's got to take care of my bonsai trees. All right, so Gabe, I'm going to put a wire on this branch, but I don't want this branch cut off. I want this branch, where's the wire? Over here. I want this branch carved. You can remember that, you're young.
I'm recording it.
He's got it all.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're not wrapping that tree off then.
It's not mine. I would buy a ticket though. So this one will be a gin. Now, dead branch. When you're doing dead branches, you want them to conform to the design.
Sorry.
Oh, I don't want to cause any, I don't want to cause a crisis in the show. This is a great tree. Like I said, I'll come back and continue to work on it when it's just too risky to work on a collected tree. A guy brought a hornbeam to the workshop in Lake Charles, in Baton Rouge. And I said, when he collected it this year, we're not working on it. The only thing I'll let you do is put a little bit of wire on the number 1 branch because that's an important branch. But by the way, that branch has got to grow 16 feet. So what we're going to do is when you make a gin, again, rhythm, right? We don't want to just have one dead branch. We got a nice skinny one here. It's in pretty good shape. We keep that. This obviously got hit by some kind of disaster or whatever. I can't pronounce that or whatever that word is. And this one needs to be reduced. So I would do is I would basically work with these two right here. And I would do a fast taper on this one. And then I would definitely carve a spiral in here and integrate it with this dead piece down here. You want to take a picture of that so you remember? So this little guy, you're going to work with these two. This doesn't mean cut, this means dead.
Okay.
But we're not going to kill it today because we want roots. Even though those roots aren't going to contribute a lot to the tree in the future, they will contribute something, okay? And right now we need something. And then how tall are we going to make this tree?
Show him.
I love Shohin, but this tree is at least 4 inches at the base. To make this a Shohin would require grafting. And in my opinion, another goal of working on bonsai, I didn't talk about this, is you want to maximize the value of the tree. So value of the tree typically is in the trunk and the roots because those are the toughest things to grow. You can always grow foliage. So Jim Smith, who did ficus trees for a living, in addition to making money on bonsai, on bougainvilleas, he said, I'm in the business of growing trunks. I grow trunks and then you put whatever you want on them. And what we don't have in America that they have in Asia is we don't have a vertically integrated market. What I mean by that is in Japan, they have bonsai farmers. So I was in Shikoku Island, and since I can speak Japanese, I asked the farmer, they had all these pine trees growing in furrows, and they were like mounds, which would contain the roots. So the roots would go out sideways, but then they had to go down. You can attain that by growing them in like a big strainer, pond strainer. Anyway, I said to the guy, how long have these trees been in the ground? 16 years. He was growing these trees in the ground. And they were very fat and chunky and tapered, but they all had a couple of sacrifice branches on them that would eventually get cut off. He doesn't style them. He is a farmer, he develops trunks, and he sells them to the next level, which is the production nurseries, and they start doing the phase 2 work. So he was doing phase 1, the production, and then guys like Kobayashi and Kimura, they're more the finished. They're doing phase 3, taking them to phase 4. And by the way, in Japan, there's a big auction market for phase 4 trees. They'll take finished trees and an artist will say, well, I don't really like what that guy did. I think if I do this to that tree and change it around, I could get $10,000 more out of it or whatever. So there's a thriving market, but they have different levels. We don't really have that in the US. You have some bonsai nurseries like Hurley. He has stuff down in Houston, and he's kind of doing it all. He's got some raw material, he's got some finished material. Jim Smith was mostly raw material, but he also had finished trees. So until we get that vertical market, we don't have the big choice, and we can't import because of the laws. We used to be able to import, but importing has been cut back quite a bit. A lot of trees are being snuck into the U.S., unfortunately, like the Premnas that are coming in now. For 10 years, myself and Eric and Pedro, we were the only guys who paid Premnas, and we gave some away. Now they're all over the internet, and they've all been imported illegally, I'm pretty sure, from Vietnam. So for picking the apex, this branch doesn't thrill me. If we actually move that up, but then we're making a juvenile tree. So this particular tree is kind of a problem. So one thing we could do is we could keep this branch and you could kind of wire it out and then eventually see how this has a dead thing on top? You could create a dead thing on top here, like this is an aborted trunk. That would probably work for this style tree. Don't get rid of it all, keep it, but get rid of everything above where the green tape is. So we'll put a piece of wire there. And then again, you'll carve, whoops, the wire's over here.
Just cut it.
Club wire always has like 17 different ends. Oh, man. Wow, I just broke it.
You're strong.
No, it's like you ever take an aluminum can and you can eventually break it, right? Maybe women don't do that, but stupid boys, we do that just for something to do. Copper, on the other hand, it's a lot harder to do. And that's why copper wire is better if you need to do some heavy branching. But copper's gotten very expensive lately. My wife has a friend whose daughter built a house and someone went in and stole all the copper out of the construction site. It happens here. Yeah, it happens everywhere because it's so expensive. Bill Valvanis just put on Facebook this week, I think it was, or maybe Sunday. For years, he's been recycling the copper. He had a big vat of it.
Oh, no.
Guess how much money he got for container of copper. $800. I got one that I've been doing for 15 years. I'll have to weigh it. I think I have to burn it because there's some insulation on some of it. If I did a project, I'd throw the extra wire in there. But I probably got a couple $100 in there. I need to go recycle it. Hurley says he recycles aluminum wire. I never really bothered to recycle aluminum. But the value is like only 10% of the copper. But I guess it's good to recycle. So we're going to cut this one off. Sorry that I'm not actually wiring, but I really feel important about you don't work on collected trees. You can analyze them and do what I'm doing now, but you really need to let the tree recover. With the one seeds and stuff, they give them 2 years at a minimum. When I collect the bald cypress tree, when I was impatient, when I first started, I would do the chop in the summer of collecting, very high mortality. Now I just collected 2. I collected 3 this year. I gave one to a friend of mine and I kept 2 and I haven't touched them. I take that back. I did one branch, the number 1 branch I started on its way, but I left everything alone. Now I have other bald cypress trees that I work on, not many. I'm not a big fan of compound leaf. The bald cypress is a compound leaf. How are we doing on time, by the way? I'm making you nervous?
No, sorry.
What is it, 11:30? No, 11 o'clock. You said we had till 3 o'clock.
No.
You said
You
that.
can start wiring
You
if
said
you
you
want.
No, I said my plane leaves at 3, and he said we got till 3 o'clock. I said, okay.
So above that little wire, you're gonna cut it, that whole part. Are you
Going to cut it right about here. It's going to be up to the artist to do it.
You're gonna make it look like there was a
Then you're going to
trauma.
take this tool and you're going to scrape the bark off. That's what this is really intended to do. It's to scrape the bark off a fresh cut. And again, I'm very leery about doing it. Maybe like this isn't a fresh. Yeah, this is alive. This one's dead, so you could come right in here and you just see how quickly it scrapes the bark off. And so when a juniper dries, it's a lot tougher to get the bark off because it integrates with the deadwood. When you first cut a juniper, that's the time to get the bark off.
What do you call that tool, by the way?
What is this tool called? It's like a scorp, but it's not.
A loop.
A tabular.
I think they call it
It
a
does
loop.
look like a.
A loop? Well, it definitely is a loop.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a picture of it so you can?
I've seen it before. I just
Figure.
don't.
4 of them off Amazon, I think.
Yeah.
Weed doesn't show that.
One of my buddies in the Czech Republic came to my house and he brought me a set of 4. It disappeared at a workshop. So I bought this one from it. One is enough. I don't do that much. My trees are pretty much far enough along now. I don't do a lot of raw carving. Although I just did a lot of carving on a Premna. And so there's always an exception to the rule. So this is gone. We have to pick an apex. So remember, I guess I didn't say today, but in general, the most general rule for the height of a tree is 6 times the thickness at the base. But that's a rule you break every time. If you're going to do a sumo, it's obviously 1-to-1. This is not a sumo. So if this is about 4 inches times 6, 24 would be like a good height. And that's actually a pretty good height for this tree, right about here. You don't want the height of the tree to be the same height as the deadwood. You want to have one of them dominate. For this particular tree, since we're tilting it actually, this is going to be the apex now that I think about it. What you're going to do is you're going to try to use a guy wire in training and bend this one down. And again, cut it to like, is this alive? No, that one's dead, darn it. This one's alive. So I would, when I change the planting angle of this to get this straight up and down, should be tighter and come forward. This right here, one of these comes your pad to the back. And then fast taper this one too. Got it? And then this is now the apex. And for me, this is the apex and this is the ultimate height of the tree right here. This is all history. This is going to be history. This is going to be cut way back. So in essence, let's make a sketch. Is there a marker? Yeah. So I'm looking at backwards, but
Do you want to turn it around?
no. When you do a design and you're internalizing the design in your head, that's where it goes, and then you work the tree to it. So watch. I really don't need that to do my design. When I went to India and all the workshops, I would give everybody a sketch, and you would not believe how crazy they went for them. And then I went back to India, And they knew about the sketches, and people started saying, am I going to get a sketch? I said, yeah, you'll get a sketch. And they would line up, because there's a lot of people in India. And I was like a celebrity. I was on the news in India. I was on TV in different cities. I actually could never be a politician, because the reporter would say, you know, what is a bonsai? And this and that. The next guy would come, what is a bonsai? Like the third time I said, I just told him that. Go get his answer from that guy. The reporters are like, oh man, they were terrible. All right, let's see. So we do have a branch coming up that way. I'll make the deadwood a different color. That's not really erasing.
Well, we didn't pay for the room.
And then you have that other one. And then there's probably some behind it. It's going to come up. So when you make a pad, like this particular thing is going to be sort of a twin trunk, but it's going to be a low twin trunk. When you look at it from the top, if I were to just draw, well, you look at it from the side first, you're going to make a triangle like that. So that means that any branch that's growing straight down, you cut off. So like for instance, when this thing comes down, if we were to keep this branch right here, all these branches would get cut off. And then we would wire, this one's dead, but we would wire these and put a little movement in it, and we would make an asymmetrical triangle here, and then we would wire these out so that just like I talked about left, right, back on the trunk, you want to do left, right on the branch, and then you have to have a couple in the beginning that goes straight up, but you never really want anything going straight down unless you want to change the direction of the branch. This one is dead, but this one's alive. So I could, in theory, if we kept all this, to get movement in the tree and to get taper, I could cut this here and then make this the future of the branch. So you don't always cut everything off, but once you've decided on your design, you don't have anything going straight down. Now, if the tree is sparse and you only have stuff going down, that's when you bring the wire into the equation and you twist it, and you bring the bottom branch to the side, okay? And junipers are very flexible, so you can do that. But for purposes of the sketch, I'll just assume that that little bud is growing into a nice little tree, and you have the fast taper gin, okay? And then you got a few branches growing up. And then from the top, if I look down, if here's the trunk, and here's that little branch coming out, you make a pad that sort of looks like this. Another triangle. So how do you do that? You got left, you got right, left, right, left, right. It's kind of like you're in the Army. Anybody in the Army? Left, right, left. I hated marching in the Army. I was too individualistic. Yeah, my soldiers never knew what to make of me. That's how you create the triangle that way. And then here, you do a similar thing. You got a couple that come up like this. You even have one go back that way, and this way. And remember, it's three-dimensional. So you get the pad like that. And so you're going to do the same thing here. And with a bigger branch, like this one's going to be a bigger branch, you can make two distinct pads. Make the bottom one stick out a little bit more than the top one. And then here, you're going to have another pad. Now, because this tree we tilted this way and we're going this way, I got a little carried away. Yeah. Am I using the right side of the eraser? I think so. Oh well. Put the pads in closer. We want to make the overall silhouette asymmetrical. Asymmetry is good in bonsai. Very rarely do you do perfectly symmetrical. If you go to a European garden, symmetry is what they are. They got the little pond, they got the statue, or they got a little, what do they call those things, a pergola or something. Then they got the rosebuds coming out in a square thing. Everything's rectilinear in a French or English garden. Japanese gardens and Chinese gardens are much more natural. Curving paths, using perspective, going away, borrowing scenery. You know what that concept? So you can do that with a bonsai tree too. You're gonna, and particularly when you do a forest design. If you make a far perspective, you have small trees in the front and the small trees in the back and the middle ones in the front. If you do a near perspective, all the front trees are the tallest and they get smaller at the back, and you're kind of borrowing the scenery. That's what you're doing. But for here, this one needs to be more asymmetrical. So what I would do is fill this, maybe bring a branch back in here, fill this in, and then this would extend out to here, and this branch would probably extend out into here. So you get your pads. And if you want to create some mystery, you're going to use lime sulfur. Lime sulfur is a chemical that you put on deadwood to make it last a little longer. The lime gets in the wood and helps preserve it, and the sulfur scares the bugs away. So once we got this thing up here, this is our top. We can create some depth with these branches here. This one's probably too heavy for the back, and there's no armpit bud. So you're going to probably, this is an armpit bud right here. I don't know if you can see it. Not a most elegant term. But see this little bud right here? That's the back branch, the future. I'm serious. That's the way I look at it. And this is obviously a 5 to 7 year program. There's no such thing as instant bonsai. Go buy a finished one. But this could be a very valuable tree when it's done. And then what kind of pot? So we don't really know what the roots are like. I'm going to guess there's not many good roots on this thing. Probably have a lopsided root, then nothing there. For this particular style, I would because it's so angular, I would go with a unglazed rectangle. Very basic, either straight side or a little bit of the curved side. They were very simple legs. And then in general, when you're selecting a pot, since some of you guys are beginners, the thickness of the trunk defines the height of the pot. Normally, you break all these rules. Like a ficus tree, you would never do that. I got ficus trees that have 18-inch trunks. They're in an inch shallow pot. Ficus trees can grow in shallow pots. These guys need some roots. And by the way, that pot needs to come up a little bit. I drew it too low. So the thickness of the trunk is the height of the pot, and the width of the pot, again, this is a general rule, the width of the pot should be 60% either the height of the tree or the width of the tree, depending on how wide it ends up being. If you look at those Japanese pine trees that I was talking about, they're always wider than they are tall, so that would be the dimension that drives the size of the pot, okay? And then typically, with a rectangular or an oval pot, you never put the tree in the middle of the pot. The only time you put the tree in the middle of the pot, usually, is with a round or a square pot. You always want to put the golden mean, which is like 0.62. Whoops, I got it backwards. 0.62 of the length and 3/6 of the length. You know about the golden mean? If you have my book, you'll learn about the golden mean because I have it in there. And it's amazing in nature how patterns replicate based on the golden mean, like our teeth. The width of our teeth follows the golden mean. The spots on a butterfly follows the golden mean. If you look at classical architecture, I don't know if they did this consciously or subconsciously, but ancient Greek architecture, the width to the length is the golden mean. The width of the cornice, everything follows the golden mean in nature. For some reason, that's considered pleasing. If you go to a plastic surgeon and they look at your face, they will apply a template of the golden mean to the spacing between your eyes and your nose and all. There's actually a thing online. Look at plastic surgery golden mean, and you'll see diagrams of how they teach the plastic surgeons. So people that have asymmetrical faces like me, my nose has been damaged by hockey, plastic surgeon would not like that. They want to have symmetry with the golden mean. So that's kind of where we would take this tree and then come back and work on it and wire it all up when it's safer to do it.
What else? What else can you do meanwhile?
On the tree?
Yeah, just like basic.
Number one, fertilize it.
Yeah.
And these like plenty of sun, so let it grow healthy and leave it alone. Again, you're trimming a dog's toenails here every day. Dog ain't gonna like it. Uh-oh, are you Buddhist, Catholic, Muslim, what? I'm not going to talk fertilizing or soil. That's like religion. It depends on your microclimate.
But do you like spray the foliage? Do you use bulbs?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Liquid or?
My mom was not into bonsai, but she took a 2x4 from the lumber yard and grew a pine tree with it. She had a green thumb, and she only used Miracle Grow. So I'm her son.
The two before had roots?
No, it's a joke. See, I'm a good poker player. But she did have a green thumb. She liked flowers. If anything had a flower, I'll tell you a story about my mom too. She was living with us as she was getting older, and I showed her how to defoliate a ficus tree, and she was, oh, I'm going to help Robert on his trees. And she went to Japan with me, and she went inside the Imperial Palace when I got there to see the bonsai trees. Remember, she lived through World War II. And she says, she pulls on my coat, she's getting kind of short in those days. I never thought in my life I'd be inside the Imperial Palace of Japan, because they were the bad guys. So, fertilizer, getting away from religion. Let me finish the story with my mom. So I show how to defoliate a ficus tree, and I go to work. Come back that night, she defoliated the number one branch of one of my pine trees. She thought she was being helpful. And I probably yelled at her, not a lot, but you know what? My mom has a green thumb. That branch did not die. Anybody else defoliates a pine tree, it's dead. With my mom, she defoliated a pine tree and the darn thing lived. So you explain that. So anyway, she was quite the character. Foliar spreading, there's a lot of debate about foliar feeding on junipers. Mazu Mizumi said you only feed the foliage. He stayed at my house, and I'm thinking, I don't believe that, because the stomas on a tree are not really designed to take fertilizer. They're designed to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen. Trees make oxygen from inhaling carbon dioxide. And one of my buddies sent me a video the other day of a microscopic image of a stoma on a tree doing its thing. And it looked like a little smile. It looked like a little thing. It was opening and closing. But it's not designed to take fertilizer. So what I think happens, this is going to sound crazy, when you do foliar feeding with spray and water, where does the water go?
Down, drips down.
Into the roots. So I only use granular fertilizer. And I use Miracle Grow 99% of the time. I heard Ryan Neal made a good comment. He goes, well, you got to use organic because you want to eat healthy food just like eat potatoes and vegetables, and you don't always drink Diet Coke. And I'm thinking, I drink Diet Coke all the time. What's he talking about? But fertilizer is whatever you want. Hurley was showing me stuff they make in Houston, which is specifically designed for Houston because they got that gumbo. Do you have gumbo here? The soil is nasty. When I lived in Houston, if I'm digging in my garden, put a shovel in, nothing comes off the shovel. Try to scrape it off with your foot, it's now stuck to your shoe. The only way you could get the stuff off the shovel was with the hose and a scrape at the same time. It is miserable doing gardening in Houston. Does that happen here?
A lot of our
Everything is so
topsoil
green
is
there.
dead Ashe juniper needles and oak leaves.
That's organic though, that's pretty good.
And then underneath the 2 inches of that is hard limestone rock.
Yeah. I think I'd rather have that than gumbo. Because you could put topsoil, you could have a truck come in and put topsoil in your garden. When you do it with gumbo, yeah, that's what they do, but after 5 years, it just gets into the gumbo, and now you're back to gumbo. That was one of my favorite things about Florida. Florida's a big sandbar. We do have coquina, which is fossilized coral, but it's beautiful digging in Florida. It's nice. I wouldn't necessarily focus on spraying. I would feed the roots. If you spray the foliage, you're feeding the roots just indirectly. Now, chemicals and all, formiticide or whatever, I forget what I used for the miticide. I got it in a little jug. I haven't sprayed it in years. I don't even know if it's still active. That you would spray. And if you're going to do a pine tree and you're going to stop needle cast, you'd use, one season I use Daconil, the white stuff. Looks terrible when you put it on. Next season I use fungus. I try to prevent the trees from getting immunity. Not the trees, but the fungus to get an immunity. So Hurley has this stuff designed for Houston. It has sulfur in it to lower the pH of the water because his water is very alkaline. And it works great for him. But for me, Miracle Grow, general purpose, works great. For my 2 junipers that I have and the few pine trees, I occasionally will give it liquid muriacid. Just a little bit of that, maybe about 5 times a year. But I don't spray the foliage, I put it on the soil. And for the citrus, they have a special citrus. I have limeberries and I have kumquats. I give them citrus formulation. And one tree that really needs it is Bogaine for bougainvilleas. If you have a bougainvillea, you need to use Bogaine fertilizer. I don't know what they have in it. I never really looked at the numbers, but it is designed for bougainvilleas. And if you give a bogey, defoliate a bogey and give it Bogaine, it will have flowers in about a month.
How do you spell that, Bo?
Bougain. And it's getting harder to come by. I'm having to mail order it.
Okay,
What's that?
I did it at Amazon.
okay.
Well, you're mail ordering it. Yeah. But you used to be able to get it at Home Depot, and for some reason, my Home Depot is not carrying it anymore. I will say this. I live close to the Indian River Lagoon, which is a big estuary, and scientists are now realizing all the fertilizer we use is messing up the lagoon. So our county has very strict restrictions on fertilizer for lawns and stuff in the summer. You can't buy lawn fertilizer until October. And so some people go to Orlando because it's a different county and they'll buy it, but you're killing this or doing something to the seagrass. And I tell you what, when I first moved to my county, the seagrass would get, like in the fall, get really stinky. And I don't know how the people live on the coast, but now I notice it's not happening as bad. So we're having an effect. We're improving the lagoon. So we all live together. We got to take that into account. But a little bit of fertilizer on a bonsai tree is probably not going to hurt the lagoon. Not everybody has bonsais.
I give it Miracle Grow spray and then Hasta Grow. That's what we used to. I switch it off every once in a while.
Yeah, and soil is a big argument. Some basics of soil are very not going to matter. The smaller the particle, the more water retention. It just has to do with the science. I won't go into it. So it sounds counterintuitive, but the shallower the pot, the bigger the particle. Unless it's a ball cypress tree or a buttonwood. Then you want those trees to stay wet, so you use smaller particles. In fact, 2 of my ball cypress trees always grow in a pond. I have a little pond next to my pool, and now it's covered with duckweed and some water lilies, and I took a picture. There's a new discussion list on Facebook about ball cypress trees. Do you guys do ball cypress trees at all? Is it too dry here? You should join that. If you're on Facebook, join the ball cypress discussion list. Randy Bennett runs it, and Randy does the Louisiana style. I'm kind of like the voice of Florida because Florida's ball cypress behave a little different than Louisiana, and the morphology is different. We have a lot of pond cypress, and pond cypress and ball cypress are now intermingling. And but anyway, they like it wet. So the 2 that I have growing in a pond, they never get brown leaves until the fall.
In a pond?
In a pot, in a finished pot, in a pond. And one of them, the pot's totally submerged. That's the one that I call spiceworm. If you Google it, it looks unlike any other ball cypress tree you've ever seen. Again, I was inspired by the movie Dune. And the big worms. And actually, I really shouldn't call it spiceworm. That they have, what's the name? Frank? Yes, they poop the spice. So that's why I called it spiceworm. And that spice, the spice is what, in the science fiction, is what enables people to travel interstellar. Because it allows these people with the big brains to project the trajectory or whatever. It's actually pretty cool science. And the new movies are great. Being a nerd, I'm going to love that kind of stuff. Also, buttonwoods. If you have a buttonwood, every time you walk past the buttonwood, water it. Buttonwoods are a type of mangrove. The red and white mangroves grow in the water, in the salt water. And they make these little vertical, they're not roots. It's like an inverse aerial root. It grows up. And that's how they get rid of the salt. Buttonwoods need at least an inch of soil. And they get their fresh water from that soil. But they can tolerate the salt because they grow right next to it. So like when I had that saltwater intrusion, did I tell you about that? My well got salt. The buttonwoods didn't care. They said, well, we must be near the beach. But they always like water. So like if I'm in the garden, I squirt my buttonwoods just for the heck of it. And then I have 2 ball cypress trees. One's growing in a pot, bonsai pot, but in a Home Depot tub. And I just ordered a bulkhead fitting. I got this idea from that discussion list because you get mosquitoes in the standing water. So I bought a bulkhead fitting, and once a week I'll just drain it, let the mosquito larvae go out, and put new water in it. And they like the fresh water. The other thing is if you get stagnant water and if you get deadfall in it, you get that shelf algae. Yeah. Do you get that here? It's nasty stuff. It grows like a sheet of algae, and it's not good for the trees. And then my other one I have in a nursery pot. It's not, I just collected it, so I'm not styling it. But what I normally do is I build a 3-inch frame around the pot, and I put extra soil, because it's a pet peeve of mine when I see people collect bald cypress trees. You got to cut those big roots. If you don't keep the top of the root covered with soil for at least 3 years, the top of that root dies, and it makes a white scar that goes up the thing. And if you want to make an ancient tree, that's okay, but if you keep the roots covered, the top of the cuts will make roots. And after 3 years, you scrape it away, the roots are established. So again, no rush. I got bald cypress trees I'm not going to touch for 3 years. Those two are getting brown leaves. The ones that grow in the pond, they're not. So they really like water.
What soil do you use? Do you use like just
For the bald cypress trees?
organic soil or like bonsai?
I started with the Mary Madison nursery mix. Didn't have much luck. Then I started submerging them in Akadama, my APL mix. Since they're submerged, they do great. If I put a bald cypress in APL but not submerged, they die. I've collected 100 trees, I'm down to 4. So I've had a lot of mortality. Now, not all, I gave a lot away. And the big one, the Sentinel, it was a beautiful tree. It was at EPCOT. It was probably 300 years old. And I cracked the top and bent it down, but it was too big. And my friend has sons, so I said, you like that tree, would you like it? I said, I'll sell you that tree for a pot. I paid $200 for the pot. It's like 24-inch diameter pot. I said, this tree's been out of the ground 9 years. You're going to think it needs repotting. Don't repot it. This tree's hundreds of years old. Guess what he did the next year? And guess what happened? It died. So when you have a collected tree, you got to be ginger on them. I would not, once this is styled and all, I wouldn't think about putting this in a pot for at least 3 years. And then once it's done its first repotting, I don't have enough time in this world to repot it. I don't repot that frequently. And let's see, any other questions about it? You want to do a quick style on that one? Because that one won't take long. I didn't really do much styling. Are you okay with that? Do we have time for me to work on this one?
Yeah, if you want to.
The guy who have his father's, he does crepe myrtles, and he doesn't try to make them look like a pine tree. He's okay with the long shoots, but what he does is, and I'm going to kind of follow Min Shan Lo here, okay? So what we have is a clump style, which is pretty neat, and it's got a lot of deadwood, and one of the characteristics for me of bald cypress trees is they will drop a branch at random for no particular reason. Have you noticed that in your garden? Do you have crepe myrtles in your garden?
I don't.
No? They're all over the place in Texas. Not that common in Florida. People have them, but they're not that common because it's getting a little bit too hot. But for instance, next year, this branch may just say, the heck with it, I'm gone. And like my one that I have left from Houston, every 5 years the trunk dies and it makes a sucker, and I got to work with a sucker. So 30-year-old tree, it's about that fat, and it's got a trunk about the size of my pinky. It's frustrating because it had some great shape, and then I didn't come out of dormancy one year. So when the reason I bring that up is when you style a crepe myrtle, you need to be like NASA. You need 2-fault tolerant. If one system fails, you need another system. If that system fails, you need another system. You need to grow some backups. This is perfect for that because it has a lot of trunks. So now, even if we do lose a trunk, you're probably not going to lose them all at one time. So the first thing we do is we clear up some of the stuff we know we don't need, like these suckers.
There's no way to prevent that.
To prevent the dying of the branches,
No, the suckers.
this is the way you prevent it. You know what also likes the sucker? What do I do with these?
Throw them away.
Do you have a trash can or something?
Yeah, it's
somewhere?
right over there.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to do it.
Well, I'm a professional mess maker.
Gabe's a professional cook.
Every club needs workers. I'm the president of my club, and it's like the president and the vice president end up doing all of it, and I try to get the club involved and delegate and stuff, but COVID was really bad for us because being in Florida, I hate to say it, I was one of the younger members of the club. And now I've made it a big recruiting drive, and we're starting to get some people in their 30s and 40s, but I understand when you got kids and you're trying to make a living and you got to build your nest egg, it's tough. However, by using the internet and by having a lot of interesting programs, we're starting to recover. And a lot of our old members, unfortunately, You know, one thing that happened to us, we had a lot of bachelors in our club. 50, 60 plus year-old bachelors, for they either widowed or they were divorced. And all of them got married late in life. And they disappeared from the clubs. Like the new married life is more important. I said, what's the matter with you guys? You should have told your wife that bonsai, I'm getting married, but you can't, when I got married, I told my wife I like to play golf, so you can never complain about me golfing, otherwise we're not getting married. And she said, okay. And you know what? She never complained about me going golfing. She might have made a snide comment here or there.
I thought you were going to say you're on your fourth wife.
No. You know how bad it was? My wife doesn't play golf. I took her to Scotland on a golf honeymoon. However, I showed remarkable restraint. 10 days in Scotland, 4 rounds of golf. That was a lot of restraint. All right, so what we'll do is maybe I get Gabe and Brian to help me wire this so we can get it done. When you have a clump, you have to decide, again, the design concept. What do we want this to look like? This is pretty gnarly, okay? And for some reason, what just popped in my head is Fanghorn Forest. You know what Fanghorn Forest is? Anybody watch Lord of the Rings? In the second movie, right? When the 2 hobbits, did anybody see the movies? When the 2 hobbits got captured by the Uruk-hai, and that's Fanghorn Forest. So right here is gnarly. Gnarliness is good and if you're trying to make something like Fanghorn Forest. But Fanghorn Forest was a lot more contorted, and now we got these straight things. And since nature is infinitely variety, I'm not going to worry about flowers this year, so I'm going to do a pretty good prune.
Do the flowers take up a lot of energy from the roots?
No.
Like the bougainvilleas do, right?
Let me ask you a question. Are you married?
Yes.
When you were hustling woman, did that take a lot of energy from your day job? No. I mean, it did. It took a lot of time. So when a crepe myrtle makes a flower, flowers are trees' sex. That's how they reproduce. They make a stamen and they make a pistil, and the pistil's a male and the stamen's a female. Some trees can self-pollinate, some cannot. Some need to send, the pistil needs to send, and some of them, like orchids, get bugs that have differentiated over time that only that one bug can crawl into the orchid, get the pollen, take it to another orchid. So I don't think flowers hurt a tree. Everyone says you got a dead-headed azalea. That's BS. If you feed the trees properly, the trees are going to do their own thing. That's my opinion. The problem with flowers on a crepe myrtle, where was that one flower? Did I cut it off already? Yeah, I cut it off. Well, it had one flower, which is kind of weird. Look where that thing is. So what Min does, and I like this idea, is he kind of goes for the sculpture of the trunk, and he'll take one branch and wire it and have 1 flower or 2 flowers from each shoot and make kind of a statement in that regard. It's not going to look like a pine tree. But if you want the flowers, that's what you got to do. The other design goal is don't even worry about the flowers. Style this and show it naked. Show it without leaves on it. Because they will get some ramification. Is it in my book? It's in my slide presentation. I actually have a crepe myrtle that I showed how it progressed over time. So I do want to create a little bit of coming down on some of these branches, whatever we got. So I like this as the front. This is, to me, obviously the front. But we have nothing in the front. Normally you're going to pick your tallest tree to be your number 1 trunk. Okay? That's called a near perspective. So if you're standing next to a forest, the trees closer to you look pretty tall. And the ones in the distance, their perspective is going to take them down. If you're way away from a forest and you look at a distance, it could be, you could have smaller trees in the front because now they're all going to be relatively the same scale. Perspective isn't messing with you. The classic example of that in Florida, doesn't happen in Louisiana, is the bald cypress dome. Have you ever heard that phrase, bald cypress dome? We get sinkholes in Florida. So you'll get a small sinkhole, maybe 5 feet, fills up with water. Guess who likes to live in water? Bald cypress trees. So mommy bald cypress tree starts in that sinkhole, gets big, gets old, and starts making babies, and then they just plop on the ground, and so they start growing around it. So the dome has a dome shape. And then there's nothing else because the sinkhole is finished, and now you got either, they call it a hammock, you have either slash pine or live oak. So the bald cypress tree grow together. Now, when you see an isolated one, it's probably humans got involved. Humans have cut it down. The big exception to that is down south, where the bald cypress trees and the Everglades are at the very southern end of their habitat, and they have evolved to look totally different. But the bottom line is, are we going to make a dome? Or are we going to try to make a near perspective? Well, the problem we have here is the tallest trees are in the back. And since somebody's already been pruning this, and they got some nice movement, I kind of like that. And if I was going to make a near perspective, I would have to cut all these back ones down, or I could change the front. What does it look like from here? Now, what do you think about that as a front?
Versus,
I like the other.
yeah, that's
The other side's much better.
Softer, yeah.
That's the gnarliness. That's Fanghorn Forest. This is like Windsor Estates. So we're going to make this the front. So we'll do what I said earlier. We'll make a little trigger gun sight. Remember where my tools are. Crepe myrtles are what? Original Chinese, I think? They're not native to America. I think they're a Chinese tree. And we're not changing the planting angle. That would really not gain. Oh, look at that. Was that somebody's front?
That's my front.
That's your front. See that? Great minds think alike. But that could be the front, or that could be the front. Now we're going to make this the front. Okay? And do we need to do any carving? Probably not. Crepe myrtle deadwood is not that durable. It does rot back.
Yeah, you gotta seal it really well.
Say that again?
You gotta seal it really well.
If you don't want it to rot, yeah. I like stuff to rot. Because to me, that becomes ancient. I bought that root dock rock. Have you tried that? The 2-part epoxy? It's got every chemical known to man except for plutonium. You got to wear a mask, you got to put goggles, you got to wear gloves. Yes, the deadwood preserves. However, as a tree grows, the deadwood, there's xylem, then there's cambium, then there's phloem. The trees grow out. So you've penetrated all the way to the xylem. All right, that's good for this year. The xylem grows, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Next year it's an 1/8 of an inch. That starts to rot. It's already been penetrated. That rots, and eventually the whole chunk that you preserve falls off. So if you're an engineer or a scientist, you know about the second law of thermodynamics, that basically you can't even break even. Everything is eventually going to fall apart. And so you live with it. And in Florida, stuff falls apart a lot faster because we get the wet, dry, wet, dry. I have buttonwoods that the deadwood on it, everyone says, oh, it lasts forever. Mike Lane says, that's old. No, 25 years, the deadwood's gone. I've tried every chemical known to man. So I just live with it. And I like hollows. So this is our fattest trunk. So we're going to make that on the front, which is not bad. And we're going to prune it down, not worrying about flowers. My design goal is not flowers. My design goal is Fanghorn Forest. Is this your tree?
Yes.
Fanghorn Forest shown naked. Okay? And recognize that, any one of these trunks could decide to go on vacation permanently next year. That one I'm going to leave a little longer. These are the backs, so I don't want to have them much taller than the front. It's interesting if you, I was never a big fan of the book Lord of the Rings. So when he got into all that poetry with the elves and stuff, it kind of lost me. When the guys made the movie, that's when I got interested in it because I thought Peter Jackson and his wife, Pippa, did a really good job capturing the mythic journey. But started thinking about the movie. You got Fanghorn Forest, right? You had the elves that live in the trees, right? The Galadriel. What about that white tree of Gondor? How it's sick, and when Sauron's doing his thing, then it gets better at the end. So Tolkien was really enamored with trees. He had the Ents, the tree people, right? So if you like trees, you should probably go, if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings, you should probably go look at it and then think about what I just said about how trees are such a critical part of the story. It's pretty neat.
They do, because they're rings.
Yeah, it's fantasy, right?
She's getting more power in the third season? Yeah.
It was a pretty good twist, though, who Sauron was.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming. Did you guys watch it? Now, my daughter's watching it. My daughter loves fantasy, and she says, I didn't like the 4th episode, but you need to watch them, Dad. They're good.
Yeah, the new one is good.
It's Prime, right? Amazon Prime?
Yes.
Yeah, I have that. I really don't watch TV. I got too many bonsai trees. I build models. I play golf.
Yeah.
So important to bonsai design. First of all, wire can't stay on forever. Okay? The two most important factors in wiring is the right size wire. So if you take about a 10 to 12 inch piece, and if you can bend the branch, you got the right size wire. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the wire has to be anchored. So there's a couple different ways of anchoring. If you have a show-in tree and you don't really have much, you could actually try to stick it in the soil, and that will help anchor it. But the most common way to anchor it is wrap it at least twice around something solid. So we have 2 branches coming from the same spot. Oh, actually, let me back up for 1 second. The way good wiring works is with proper pruning. What I mean by that is, if you have branching of 2, it's very easy to do proper wiring. You go from one branch to the other. When you get branching of 3, it becomes much more difficult to do proper wiring. And there's another disadvantage of 3 or 4. You start to get a nodule like you're getting in here. Say these things get gnawed, and you're getting that reverse taper. Reverse taper destroys the illusion of the age. That's when something goes up and gets fat and then gets skinny again. Now, in ancient trees, they have reverse taper. Something may have happened to the part of the tree and they got older. So reverse taper is not the end of the world. And you could always carve away reverse taper if it's bothering you. But you don't really want to have these nodules at the nodes. Like pine trees are notorious for that. A pine tree grows and it makes a node and it shoots out a lot of shoots, particularly when it's young. And then it does it again and it grows in what they call whorls. And if you have all the branches coming from a whorl, that whorl's going to get fat and it's going to look ugly. So when the trees are young, you got to be decisive and cut the branch off so you get a branching of 2. Comes up, 1 branch. Comes up, 2 branch. So for a crepe myrtle, though, it's a slightly different story. They do bud back, but we don't really want 2 branches coming from the same spot unless there is a little stub of a branch there. So this particular guy does have a stub. So in essence, this is a bifurcated branch of that first thing. So I'm going to do something a little unorthodox, but this is an effective technique when you have this scenario here. Normally you would take the wire and wrap it twice around the trunk and go to another branch. Well, where's the other branch right here? There isn't one. So I can't do the traditional wire technique, but this is a good way to conserve wire. Take the wire, bend it over like that. Now it is interesting here. This is self-grafted. I love when, the grafted part is dead though. Can you see right here? This trunk had grafted to this tree at one point, but this trunk died. And that's what crepe myrtles do. They just let trunks go. I have a live oak in my front yard. I actually bought the lot that my house is on because it's doing that. The 2 trees grafted at the bottom, they grafted at the top. And with time, that'll be 1 tree. I've seen ancient trees. So I got to kind of sneak the wire in between the graft. I don't want to destroy the dead graft. I think it's kind of cool. You keep it there as long as you want. Put lime sulfur on it. I wouldn't put anything more than that on it. You could try that. If you want to risk your health, you could try that chemical. Hurley was telling me, he tries this, you got to put on 10 coats and let it penetrate. It still doesn't solve the problem that I told you about. As the tree grows, the deadwood's going to keep growing and eventually that will rot off. And then the whole thing's going to fall off as a nice chunk. So you try to get it pretty tight. And you leave wire on the tree, not forever. So when you do the 2 like this and you bring them up, the one that is on the outside is the one that goes on the first branch, and the one that's on the inside will go on the second branch. Because you don't want to cross wires. For the new people, why would you not want to cross wires? Is there a scientific reason, you think? No opinion? Probably haven't thought about that. All right, here's a wire. So if I put this on the branch like this, and I come down here, and I do this branch like this, see how the wires are crossing? That's crossing wires. Why is that considered bad wiring? It's ugly.
It looks bad.
It's ugly. That's really the only reason. It has nothing to do with the strength of the wire. The other thing I hear people say, if you're going to put 2 wires on a branch, Say again?
The wires stay parallel then?
Yeah, they should be parallel. If you put two wires on a branch, you should put them right next to one another. Now, as an engineer, I know that's wrong. Because you think about it, if the wires are acting independent of each other, right next to one another, they're still independent. They're going to have more stiffness, but they don't really help each other. You're much better spacing the second ones evenly so that whenever you bend the branch is going to bend this way. It's a tube. The outside of the bend is going to be in tension. The inside of the bend is going to be in compression. Trees are very strong in compression. They're weak in tension. You know what else is that way? Concrete. If you ever see them build a concrete bridge, well, to put down the girder, it'll be actually curved. Watch a construction site sometime. The bridge is curved, and then when they put the road bed on it, it levels out. They're pre-stressing the concrete because concrete's very weak in tension. And that's why they put wire in concrete. So when you do wire, and I'll put two on one branch to show you, put the wire in the middle of this, the one that's already existing there. And the reason is as you bend it, you'll always have a better chance of having a wire right behind the bend to support the bend. If you have the two right next to one another, you're going to have an open gap. So make sense? Again, that's one thing that's great about bonsai is you got to know horticulture, you got to know botany. Turns out you got to know engineering. There's a lot, you got to know art. And that's my next book. I'm going to take that book off my hard drive that the publishers rejected, and I'm going to redo it because it doesn't cost anything to self-publish. And I'm changing the name to Spark, the Impetus of Design. And every chapter, it'll take a concept like austerity, royalty, love, risk, and it's going to talk about how you design a bonsai tree and other stuff to that. So if you're kind of nerdy and are interested in that, I'll let you know. And it should be out hopefully by Christmas. My big problem is getting permission to publish all the photos I need. It's very hard. I have to go find photos in the public domain because otherwise I have to write letters and then photographers want $500. But when I did that book, I actually contacted a couple photographers and a guy in the UK, he said, I'll let you use the picture if you send me the book. I said, that's a deal. All right, so this one's in the back. Let's see, will that bend that? This will be a case where I'll put two pieces of wire. And on this particular one, I'm going to do more traditional wiring. I'm going to wire from this guy to this guy, and I'm going to wire from this guy to this guy. Even though I got 1, 2, 3, 4, I have 4 branches coming from one node, which I just said is a no-no. And I'm going to change my mind. Going back to the rules, I'm not going to do that. I'm cutting this guy off because he's kind of growing into the trunk. That's the thing about a clump or forest design. When you design the tree, you're designing the whole clump together. So the left, right applies to the whole clump or the forest. You don't want to have a lot of stuff, even though this happens in nature, you don't want the stuff growing in the middle unless you get to the very top because you want to see the trunks. So like this little thing here, I'd pluck that off, this little thing. That one I think might be dead. Yeah, that's dead. And we don't need that up there. This will do it. So you want to design everything so that it's sort of on the periphery. That's another thing. When you get to phase 4 of a bonsai design, you want the foliage on the periphery of the crown. You don't want a lot of foliage inside. That makes it look like a bush. So when next time you go outside and take a look at a mature tree, you'll see most of the leaves are on the outside. There might be some leaves on the inside, but very few leaves are going to grow on a mature tree right next to the trunk. So like for instance on these little weak things, you don't want them. They have to come off and you want the periphery. Now we're going to show this tree when it's naked. So you want to try to develop some ramification, and crepe myrtles will ramify. And the way you ramify is you have to cut the apical bud. When you cut the apical bud, you're changing the chemistry in the tree, and depending on the tree, this tree does back bud, so it's going to make what they call meristem buds. It's going to make more buds in here. And we're not worrying about flowers, so what you do is let's see, this is now September. It's getting kind of late, really. But you may get another flush of growth before it goes. When do these go dormant here?
December.
Probably December.
Yeah, so it'll grow a little bit more. Give it some heavy fertilizer. So I won't do it now, but once I'm finished wiring, I'm going to cut for ramification, okay? So I'm going to show you how you double up the wire. So I'm going to take the wire, I'm going to wrap it around this heavy branch and anchor it. Normally you don't go from one branch to the other because if you don't anchor the wire, you're going to get a seesaw. When you wire one branch, the other branch is going to go up. Yesterday I did a kerf and on a ficus, and I really bent the branch. We had to actually put another guy wire to the other side of the pot to keep the tree from pulling over. We had to do a little bit of engineering. The kerf technique is interesting. It's a way you can bend a very thick branch. There's the kerf technique. You can hollow out the branch. So I actually did I bent a very heavy branch on a boxwood on Tuesday. And the way I did it is I took that little scorp. I think these are called scorps. And I went to the inside of the curve towards where you don't see it. And I carved out a groove. So instead of a circle, we had a circle with a groove in it. Then I wrapped it with the green tape and with wire. And it bent like a piece of spaghetti. In technical terms, I reduced the moment of inertia of the branch. And there are lots of ways you can bend heavy branches. You can split them. I did a demo in Italy once where I actually separated the live wood from the dead wood. It was a juniper. And remember I said they grow in tubes? So you had this dead tube, but it went straight up, kind of like this one. And so about that high up, I split it. I raffiated in the live part, and I steamed the dead part, again, pretty advanced, and I bent it down 180 degrees. So again, respecting the tree. I was pretty drastic, but that tree was not collected that year. That tree had been collected 3 years earlier. I did another demo in the Czech Republic on a Pinus inclinata, which is their type of Scots pine. It's a gorgeous old tree. And it required removing the whole bottom of the tree. And that's removing more than a third of the foliage. To me, that's a no-no on any conifer. You'd never remove, I heard Kimura say that, so I know it's a good strategy. So I just put a white towel over it. And then through the internet, you got all these instant experts. They were criticizing me for not cutting it off. It was an unfinished bonsai. And I didn't worry about it. And then my friend who lives in that town, 2 years later, sent me a picture of the tree. The designer cut the branch off, and he did change the top that I had a little bit. It looked gorgeous. I didn't try to let my ego take over for the tree. And I'm trying to respect the tree. All right, this is kind of an interesting branch right here. It's growing towards the middle, and then it comes back this way. So you have to decide that, do we want to keep that particular branch? Since we're doing fanghorn, what's this one doing? We're going right here, and then we have this thing here. What happens if I get rid of that? No, I think if we get rid of that, it's going to look like a football goalpost. Right? It's gonna, and by the way, I did a ficus at the Burton Gardens for the Baton Rouge thing. As people are getting older in Baton Rouge, they're giving their trees to LSU, and LSU's got this humongous arboretum because they must have an agriculture school. And they're not really taking care of the bonsai trees, they just have them. And there was a ficus where they had two separate trunks, and one branch did just like this here. It went up and it grafted to the other ficus. And the guy had put one of those ugly-looking reddish lava rocks in there, which is not ideal. If you're going to use a rock, it needs to have some character. So I said, man, I'm going to be like Microsoft right here. This is not a bug. This is going to be a feature. So we styled the tree. We made the focal point. This is the focal point of this tree. We made the focal point kind of that H design. And because I like to give trees names, I said, I'd like to name this tree Touchdown because it looks like a goalpost. And the tree was way out here. I said, we didn't make the tree any bigger than this. And by the way, I don't think this tree should be any taller than this. Just when you ramify it, you get into all this fuzziness, and the tree is not this tall. And the advantage of having a shorter tree makes the trunk much more impressive. If you let this tree be really tall, this becomes an afterthought. This is now the focus, and this is what we really want to feature. And while we're doing that, what kind of pot will we put that in? Any ideas? Would you go round on your pot? This isn't a round pot now. What do you think about it? Oval. Okay. And what about color? Any opinions?
Blue.
Why blue?
You got red flowers.
It was a pink flower.
Remember my design concept though? What was my design concept for this tree? I'm not going to have flowers on this tree when I show it.
Yeah, that's right.
When we show this tree, if it's done right, there should be very dense ramification right here, and that's going to be cool. Crepe myrtles look, and by the way, another feature of crepe myrtles that a lot of trees don't have is they have gorgeous bark. They have that exfoliating bark.
Oh, yeah.
So making this the feature of the tree, and with a little bit of 409, that chemical that you buy in your housing thing, in the cleaning department, I find that that's great for cleaning trunks. What I do is I totally saturate the pot to keep, and it's like that expression, do as you ought to, add acid to water. Anybody take chemistry, remember that? Because if you put water and acid, when that drop hits, it's very high concentration of acid. Splashes, you're in trouble. But if you add the acid to the water, it's always low concentration. So if you fill the pot with water and it's nice and wet, even if 409 was going to hurt the tree, it's very low concentration. As soon as you finish putting it on, you scrub it with those little brushes. I get them at Harbor Freight. They're pretty cheap. You scrub it, beautiful bark. Don't use the wire brushes on a crepe myrtle because the bark is thin. Then hose it down and it gets nice and clean. You get rid of the moss and the lichen. Lichen is kind of, again, like religion. Some people like lichen on trees. I typically remove it for a show because, I don't know, it depends. I think I maybe showed a tree once with lichen on it. And again, if people will, oh, you can't have lichen. Yes, I do. No, you can't. So again, it's personal taste. I suppose if you want to make an ancient tree, lichen isn't the worst thing. Do you have Spanish moss here?
Yes.
A little bit. It's crazy. But the problem with Spanish moss is it doesn't grow in scale. It would dominate a bonsai tree. So it's kind of hard to have Spanish moss. All right, we wired that one. We'll put some phi wire on this one.
Oh, there's more color pot.
Oh yeah, the pot. So, okay, the focal point is this. We're going to have white on it. It's going to put lime sulfur. We're going to clean the bark. And hopefully this one is the kind that exfoliates. Yeah, I see some of the dark brown there. So I might go with either a light-colored pot or that's brown and this is kind of green. Maybe like a black pot. Really dark, because you're going to have white on the deadwood and you have very light with some dark brown, or potentially a dark brown, or you could go with the very, what I've been doing is to a lot of my pots is make it a solid color, and then when I make my own pots, I put a dash of glaze on it. I have one right now, I have a Premna in it. When I did the glaze and I slipped a little, so the glaze dripped down and then it made a horizontal drip. And I said, drat. Because when you, have you ever done ceramics? The glaze looks, when you put the glaze on a pot, it looks nothing like the finished glaze. It's just it'll totally change color. So I didn't know what it was going to look like. And when it came out, it's gorgeous. It's red. It was a red thing on a blue background. And now I took a Premna and I grew it around a rock. And this is a tree where the number one branch is in the back. I brought the number one branch around and I'm making kind of a cascade out of a branch that was laying on the top. And that cascade is matching the glaze on the pot. So there's so many different ways you can take bonsai. That's one thing I love about it. You get into pottery, you get into, I make my own stands. Most of the stands on my trees, I've made them all.
You said you make your own pots?
Yeah, but I'm not that great of a potter. I have made some pots that some people wanted to buy, which is amazing. All right, what did I do? Oh.
Or rectangle or...
But I took a couple classes at the community college, so I learned the wheel. But that takes a lot of practice, and I don't do it enough. I also did a lot of slab building and some coil building. Lately, though, I've been making round ones, and they don't come out that round. However, I like it.
Now, dinner, you said you had a 3D printer. Have you tried doing 3D printed pots?
I thought about it, but you can't, with my resin, because I do the liquid resin. Did I tell you about the dwarves that I made? I was in our zoo show, I can't remember, I had a podocarpus. The termites got into it and they totally hollowed it out. But the foliage didn't die, amazingly. I had termites that killed an elm. So I put it in the zoo show. And I know a lot of kids are going to be at the zoo. Half of the people that come are kids. So I 3D printed a bunch of dwarves. One's got a shovel, one had a saw. And I built the platforms and it made it look like the dwarves are working around the tree. The kids loved it. I wasn't there, but one of the kids tried to steal one of the dwarves. They caught him. There were people watching it. He was a young kid.
Yeah.
So it was so cool. I left the dwarves on the tree and I put it in my yard. Well, it turns out, even though the resin is UV cured, they can't stay in the sun that long. And they just sort of disappeared. They turned to powder, not even powder. But don't worry, I can print more dwarves.
Yeah, that's so funny.
So again, is that a traditional bonsai display? The dwarves mining a tree? It was so cool.
You need some
Actually, I noticed this past week, some animal doesn't like my platform. And they take the platform and throw it on the ground. I'll put it back on the tree. The next day, the platform's back on the ground. Like, I got to get a wildlife camera and see who does not like my platform. And they get my pellet gun out. Steampunk. You know the concept of steampunk? I think steampunk goes well with the idea of bonsai. I actually made a time machine. Again, this is all on my Mahogany Row Studio page. You'll see it. I have an old gas pump that was on my in-laws' farm, and my father was throwing it away, so I took it, I sandblasted it, but I didn't make a gas pump out of it. I made it as a cabinet in my studio, my office, where I have like a router and a printer in it. I took the computer. If you're old enough in the 60s and 50s, when you bought gas, this analog computer, it wasn't digital, would all these gears would spin, and every gallon would go ding. Anybody remember that? You guys don't remember that. And it had a little globe, and there was a propeller spinning in the globe to show that it was working. It's really a marvel of engineering. I said, I can't throw that away. So I actually took the computer, and I had it sitting in my garage for like 20 years. And I said, I want to do a steampunk design time travel. And I found out I could turn the gears by hand and make the numbers change. So I built this steampunk-looking wooden frame, and then I offset it, and I found this fabric that has this weird-looking language on it. It looks like French or Spanish. And then I tell people it's a time machine. I said, look, give me a date. And I set a date on the dial, and then I spin it, and it goes ding. Now you're now 3 seconds in the future. They all fall for it. Just like you fell for my 2x4 joke. So that was one of my themes, time machine, and very well received. And you know what happened to the time machine? It's now my living room's coffee table. My wife says, I don't like the brass one, and it's got a glass top. I said, okay, so what does that mean? I want your time machine. What? You can have it. So now the time machine sits in our living room in front of the couch. It's the room that we never use.
that is so funny.
It looks pretty cool as a coffee table.
Yeah.
That means I can't put in a show, though.
Aw, you could borrow it.
And my wife she's like, we have a very neat house, unless it's my garage. I have too much stuff in my garage. Normally you wouldn't wire the apex too much, but I'll just do it for fun. How much time do we have, by the way? All right, so what, work till 1 o'clock? Well, we had McDonald's, so I'm in good shape. Okay, one of the problems with this particular design, remember the comb over? We got this right here. 3 in a row. Wouldn't be bad if you're doing Texas Hold'em. Kind of have like a full house, a pair and a triple. But it's a clump. And since we got the residue and we have this one in front of it, and because this is the middle, if I were to this is a way you can think about it. What if I got rid of that branch? It reduces some of the complexity of the design. One of the features of this particular design is the complexity of it with all the different shoots. The fact that they are all kind of straight and these are gnarly does bother me a little bit, but not that much. One thing that does bother me is this root. You probably can't see it, but it's cut off and it looks like an aerial root. So we'll take care of that right now.
I didn't really see that straightest one behind the front.
Because it's behind, yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't miss it.
Remember though, we're doing Venus, we're not doing Mona Lisa. Whoa, incoming!
Right.
Can you say that?
So does it help from the back?
I kind of like clumps. Right before I left on this trip, I have a sea hibiscus that I put in the ground and it just got amazingly large. And then branches fell and it kind of ground layered itself. And I noticed that there was like 4 trunks and a small trunk coming out of a pretty nice little nodular base like this. And they're only like 3 years old. So right before I came, I got my reciprocating saw. It took me like 2 minutes to get the blade, 5 minutes to get the blade up. I got my shovel to collect. And I got one other thing. What was the other tool? I had 2 reciprocating saws in case the battery went out, thinking I'm in for an ordeal, right? Guess how long it took me to get that tree to the ground? 1 minute. I went, out of the ground. It had no taproot because it was the easiest tree I've ever collected. And because every year BSF has a show at Walt Disney World. Did I talk about that? Because I know I talked about it this week. All right, so the BSF collaborates with Walt Disney, and at EPCOT, when they have the Flower and Garden Show at the Japan Pavilion, we show bonsai trees. And it's amazing how much publicity you get. I was on an airplane once, getting ready to go to a bonsai show in Seattle. I was wearing a bonsai shirt, and the guy sitting next to me says, "Oh, you do bonsai?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I saw this tree with all this white stuff underneath the red Torii gate at Disney World. That was my tree." It was Dante's Inferno, this one in the book here. That's what I named the tree, Dante's Inferno. Because to me it looked like it was a funeral.
Adam Levine promotes it a lot.
Doesn't that look like maybe flames and smoke around a fire? So then he ended up buying me drinks. I said, "Oh, if you're going to buy drinks, I'll drink them. I don't really drink much." And then two ladies in front of us, they were going to Seattle on a conference for indoor landscaping. And they heard us talking, so they turned around, the whole conversation, like talking about trees and stuff. It was a very interesting flight from Orlando to, oh, what's this? We got wire already in here. Did you do this?
Absolutely not.
The wiring is, all right, this wiring is breaking a few rules. First of all, notice how I did the wiring on this branch. I talked about anchoring. So notice the angle of the wire to the branch for the newbies. It's at least 45 degrees. That way you can bend it any way you want. I could turn this into a pretzel if I wanted to, but it's not part of the design. The second thing is that if you go less than 45 degrees, you'll reduce the holding power of the wire. If you go more than 45 degrees, you're risking breaking the branch because there's not enough wire supporting the outside of the bend. However, Sutin, who's the best artist in the United States in my opinion, you can leave that on the video. I notice when he wires, he goes like 30 degrees. He really stretches it out. And how he does that, I don't know. He's just a genius. He's figured it out. I have to do the 45 degrees. The other thing is I mentioned crossing wire. The way you never cross wire is once you put a piece of wire down, I'll double wire this just to show it, even though it doesn't need it. The way you never cross wire is take the new wire and put it parallel to the existing wire, just like that. See how this wire goes like that? If I put that parallel and I have bifurcated branches, you would have to really work hard to cross the wire. And then when you wire, one hand holds the wire you just put down on the trunk and you work your way down. And then the other hand is making loops, little circles. And then when you get to these really fine branches, I like to just bend the wire over a little bit like that to trap the end of the branch in the wire. Otherwise it can pop out. And then it amazingly will pop out all the way down the wire, and then you got to rewire it. But because, again, this is phase one, we're not putting this in a show, you would trim that wire just to be a little neat. I have one right here, I should trim it. And if you do put wire on a tree, you should use the wire. I've seen lots of people wire a branch and then not bend the branch. Why put wire on a branch if you're not going to bend it? Man, what's going on here? Something weird. No, okay, I'm doing it right, am I? Yeah. See, then I'm coming down here, and I'm going to put it in the middle of the existing wraps to support the bending. And this one I don't really have to trap it off because I've already got the other one trapped. And that's overkill for that particular branch. But then I could just give it a little bend. Normally I don't like to do the bending until I'm done wiring, because then I can see how everything goes together. You want to minimize the bending if you can. Some of these guys, they go to schools and then the master makes them, don't like the wiring, take it off and redo it again. That's tough on the tree. You're doing, and particularly if they didn't know how to put the wire on in the first place, chances are they don't have to take the wire off. Anyway, I'm not a wire Nazi. Do we want to change any of these trunk angles? That's always something you can think about. And anything goes in changing a trunk angle. For instance, I'm not going to recommend doing this, but we could do something like this. You could stick a piece of wood in there. On one of my bald cypress trees that I collected, I said I didn't want to mess with it with wire, and I had a branch going up and then it was going sideways. I found a stone in my pathway, and I just wedged the stone between the branch and the trunk, and I left that one there for 2 weeks. Then I found the bigger stone, took that one out, put a bigger stone, eventually got the branch bent without even wiring, just by sticking a stone in there. So you could put pieces of wood, you could take a chopstick. We don't have,
Sophisticated here, we use cork from the wine.
White models.
that gives you an excuse to drink more wine, which most people would probably like. All right, I got to put some wire over here. So we're using this branch. Technically, I just designed the tree where the number one branch is in the back. See that? Does it look bad? No. The design requires it. So I just kind of proved my point. I wasn't BSing. Speaking of BSing, I was doing a program for Orlando, and I mentioned there are no weeds in my bonsai trees. And no one said anything. And some people kind of like crossed their legs and they looked at it down. I got weeds in my trees. So then I did the Ficus Festival, which is a little private show that I do, and it's open to anybody. And Adam is usually my guest artist, and last year I had Laurent, and last year I made it big. We had a raffle. It was actually like a miniature show. And one of the Orlando guys comes up and he goes, I got to apologize. And I said, for what? He goes, I thought you were full of BS when you said there are no weeds in your trees, but you're right. There's no weeds in your trees. How do you keep weeds from growing in trees? You pluck them every day. And you don't use much organic. All right, this branch is breaking a rule. This branch is crossing behind that tree. So, what do you think? Is it worth breaking that rule? Yes, you can break as many rules as you want, in my opinion. The reason why I want to break that rule is this doesn't have anything here. And what's interesting about that is that it's actually really badly paced. Even in conjunction with the two things, it would be better if that branch was over here. But then that would be, where's my front? Okay, that's to the back. So it's not the end of the world. What I'll do, once I wire it, I'll move it more to the back. If does anybody have John Naka's books? Do you have the gold one?
I do.
Take a look. He has a painting in that book, or it's a line drawing of a bunch of pine trees, and one of them is crossing. And he talks about it. He says crossing trunks is not the end of the world, particularly in a forest. John Naka was obviously a brilliant man. I never met him, but definitely studied his work. And I asked Ben Oki, I said, Ben Oki, are you going to write a book? And Ben Oki was a student of John Naka. And Ben Oki said, why? John Naka wrote his books. You don't need any other books. Okay. Whoops. Yeah, that one was brittle. So I got a branch coming from the back. It's kind of a bar branch. You can still think about the rules, even when you're doing something creative. You can think about them, but you can break them. When you have a chop like that and it's rotted back, this is it's probably a pretty handy tool for that. This is a different type of scorp. You just can come in here and break the dead wood off. The concept is, in Fanghorn Forest, there aren't many humans, because the trees, I guess, eat them or crush them. So we don't want the hand of human in Fanghorn Forest. We want to make it look like everything happened by either the trees stomping them or weather, or just the second law and third law of thermodynamics. Corrosion. This was chopped with a saw. So we'll try peeling it. Actually, the gin pliers, that's what they're designed for as well, is for grabbing the gins and breaking them off to make them look natural. Because when you break something off, particularly when it's rotten like this, it's going to break with the grain and it's going to look in a more natural mode. And bonsai is really about attention to details. That's why you can't really make a finished tree in a program, in my opinion. There's so many little nitnoid things you got to do. And again, this is a phase 1 tree. Although, since we went with a no-flower, ramified design, I think this tree could be show ready in about 3 years. And just show it naked. You don't need the flowers. You don't need, because you got so many trunks, in 3 years, I'm going to show you the pruning technique in a second, you'll get the ramification. This is getting there. You only need about this much, double what you got right here, and double that here. And when you have all that, this is going to be a pretty impressive little specimen. Are we raffling this one? I'll buy a ticket, although I don't know if it would live in Florida.
You buy a seat ticket for it.
No, I don't want to cause trouble for you guys. I'm just being funny. We always do show and tell. Do you guys do show and tell at your meetings?
We try, nobody brings anything.
Oh, no, you got to do show and tell. That is one of the best features of our meeting, is that people bring in trees and they talk about what they did on the tree, and you learn a lot. Somebody that, you know, even if they're not an expert, they know about that particular tree and stuff, and it's nice to see what other people did. And by the way, we encourage beginners to bring in their brand new trees, because they can then get feedback on it maybe. Maybe there's something they could do to improve it. I would highly recommend you add show and tell to your program. We also serve food after show and tell, so that motivates everybody to not talk as much. You never want to do the...
If I give you credit, can I steal some of your things off the website
Oh, yeah.
and put them in our newsletter?
Yeah, yeah. Any of those articles. The one that I wrote about, which one was that? It was one of my recent articles. Lake Charles, even though there's 60 people in the club, but only 2 people came to my program. It's kind of weird. What did I write? Oh, naming trees. I did an article about why you should name trees. And they really liked it, and they wanted to reprint it. But you can reprint any of the Kempinski corners or stuff off my blog. Not my blog. I stopped doing the blog. I used to have a blog called Mahogany Road Studio, and it was hosted by a guy in Wisconsin. And I don't know, the Chinese or the Russians, they hacked it, and all the images got deleted. And so I looked at, and I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I said, man, that's going to be a lot of work to restart all the images. And frankly, I was getting really busy at work, and the blog was giving me too much notoriety. I was getting invites to go everywhere, and I did go a lot of places, but I couldn't be gone 3 months out of the year doing bonsai all over the place. But then Facebook comes along, and you can have your private page, or you can have any kind of page. Like we have a club page, and I have Mahogany Road Studio. So I use that to talk about what I'm doing. It's not all bonsai. I'll give you a warning. It's sometimes science. It's sometimes my model building or painting or whatever. I never do politics, though. No sense talking about politics.
Plenty of that.
Yeah. Well, actually, we probably need like a little Dremel to clean these up a little better, because they're recessed. There's only so much you can do with the gin pliers. But again, we got a lot of nice scars, which is rhythm, because it's repetition of form. And this scar needs work. Actually, on this side, this scar is very good. It's totally decayed. On this side, classy. Remember I told you how it cracks with the grain and then it makes cross cracks? When you get a chance, come take a look at this scar right here. It's doing exactly what I talked about. I don't care how good of a carver you are, you can't replicate that. That's nature doing its thing, and that's really nice. But that's probably not going to be with us for the next 10 years. It's far enough decayed that this little piece right here is probably going to break off. So let's see. I don't normally worry about wiring the top on a deciduous type tree. We just do clip and grow. So we want to get this in a show in a few years, so we really got to start the ramification process. And the way you ramify is you cut the apical bud, but on this particular one, with the azaleas, they recommend cutting back to 2 leaves. And buttonwoods really respond well to the 2-leaf pruning. If you want to get small leaves, you're shaking your head. I have a buttonwood that has such small leaves. It got a best in a show last year, and everything is wiggly. I wiggled the heck out of it. My club calls it the Kempinski wiggle. I don't know how to dance, so I guess that would be my... So I'm cutting down to the top to the 2 leaves, because I don't want this tree to be any taller than this. And these guys, notice I didn't prune, because even though they're the back, right? No, that's the side. Okay, number 1 is in the back. I shouldn't have pruned that one, darn it. I should have let that one grow wild for a year. And you won't have as much ramification on it in 3 years, but at least it'll get fatter, okay? Whereas this one, this is not the number 1 branch, but they are kind of wimpy to be the number 2 branch. So let them grow. Next year you cut them back. The rest of these you can cut back pretty hard. Now, you might, believe it or not, with this hard of a pruning and this late in the season, you might get a second flush of flowers. And the shoots are going to be a lot shorter. So you might get flowers in tight. If that happens, that's when you go to my next topic that I always talk about, how to photograph bonsai trees. That's a critical skill. Do you do photography? Yeah, you. Yeah, well, I think photography is a crucial aspect in a bonsai artist's repertoire for a bunch of reasons. Number 1, you can watch how the trees progress. Because trees are always going to change, and they change slowly, just like our hair grows. We never really notice our hair growing unless you shave your face and you realize, oh, it grew that much in one day. But they slowly change, and so you're looking at them, and unless you go away for a couple of months, you don't know they're going to change. Like I'm going to go home after a week, and I guarantee my Premna is going to look different. They're like in their last, let's do it before the sun goes down. And so that's one thing. You can take pictures for diagnostic reasons. So what happens when a tree is, you're looking at this tree right here, right? And everything's kind of the same size. We do eventually need to decide to make maybe this guy the tallest one, since these two are, this is the fattest one, but this creates the illusion of the fatness, although this is dead. So how longer this is going to be with us, we don't know. This one should be taller. I made a little boo-boo, so we'll fix that. How do we make it the taller one? We just cut this one back. I just cut aluminum wire with the scissor. Don't tell anybody. My tool and how to sharpen them. Not supposed to do that. Particularly stainless steel, they're kind of wimpy. It's hard to get a very sharp edge on stainless steel. Like this little knife right here, I haven't used it. Normally when I make a cut, I like to go in and trim the cambium with a very sharp knife. Yes, but you know what? I don't think there's anywhere I need it because most of the cuts have already been made. I haven't made any major cuts. But my point is, this is carbon steel. You can get it very sharp. If I do that, I could shave myself. Can't do that with stainless steel, just the metallurgy. So that's why it's really critical to have a sharp knife in your toolkit if you're going to use the stainless steel tools, because when you cut, you are crushing the cambium, and cambium is only like 2 or 3 cells across. So then you want to come in with that knife and maybe just cut 1 cell so you don't cause a big damage. You get better healing that way. Although for this one, we're not that worried about healing. We like the design. We like the gnarliness of it. And we're keeping both of these because technically they're one branch. They just happen to branch very quick. So you say oval pot. I think rectangular pot, shallow pot. Since we've reduced the height of the tree and we have a shallow pot, then it's going to make everything look more substantial. And since it's fanghorn forest, a shallow pot where you have it really offset, and earlier I said the golden mean, right, 0.6. You might want to do a oval, if you can get the roots in it, which I think you could, put it really close here and have the pot go out to here and have a lot of negative space in the pot. And then if you could find some really small plant. One thing I've discovered is string of pearls. It's like a succulent. And I have this fantasy rock and I have a Premna growing in it and I have a ficus on the other side and I got bromeliads and things and I have 7 species in this one thing and I put the string of pearls in there and now they're hanging over the edge. And my neighbor I said, can I borrow your welder? I want to weld up a stand for this tree. I want to elevate it out of steel and I want to make it look like it's floating through space. And he said, oh, that's cool. I'll do it. So I gave him the tree, and he knows nothing about bonsai, and he has ADD, and he's got some issues, but so this is 3 weeks before the show. 2 weeks before the show, I said, hey, Chris, how you making out? Oh, yeah, I'll get to it. 2 days before the show, are you done, Chris? Give me the welder, I'll do it. No, I'll do it. And he did a great job. He painted it, and he had the stand. He drilled holes in my rock. But he knew what he was doing. and then the stands fit in the holes. And you probably could find it on my Mahogany Row Studio page, because I took it to the Winter Silhouette Show. And then I had a little pot that I made that looked like a rocket ship. And he built another stand that we clamped to the back of the table, and it came up and it went into the back of the pot, and it was kind of hidden. So I have a rocket ship with plants in it, accent plants, flying over my meteorite that's in midair. So again, is that a traditional display? No, but I got a lot of positive comments and I enjoyed it. That's the most important thing. So I think a rectangular pot skewed to this side, and if you could find some, like Kingsville boxwood maybe, they grow here. Yes. They're really small leaves, or maybe even an Ilex Schillings, a very small one. Very little teeny thing in here to simulate the edge of Fanghorn Forest. And if you really want to get crazy, 3D print, what's his name? Pittman and Mary. And then you got Treebeard's buddy, Crape. And that's it. That's all yeah.
Would you ever try to triangulate it?
Yeah, that's what I just said. I made a boo-boo. This one should be the tallest one.
Okay.
And then, so it should be,
That in the future.
well, yeah, I can't do it today. It has to grow into it.
No, but over time.
Yeah, I would make this a little bit taller. Not much. In a way, you got negative space. And you got, what I like about this clump, by the way, is it naturally has variable spacing with the trees already. This one's dead, but it's very skinny. That's a nice gap. That's a pretty good gap. This one kind of ruins it. Eventually, maybe you get rid of that tree. I don't know. It depends. You can't really see it from the front, so it's not the end of the world. That's a good gap. Almost all those spacings are different. You never want to have a forest. All the spacing is the same. Then again, I never say never, because if you drive to the south and you see a tree farm, the way they grow for maximum wood, they space them equally, and then they have formulas like after every 5 years they remove the middle one, etc. I almost invested in a teak farm years ago, and they said, and you're going to get continuous cash flow. And I said, how's that? He said, well, we're going to plant them really close. And year 3, we're going to cut down every third, whatever it was, every second one we cut down, because then we double the space in between them, and you'll get, like if you invested $5,000, you'll get back $200 that year from whatever we get. And then the next year we're going to cut down the next one, and because they get bigger and bigger. And I said, that's pretty cool, but it was in Costa Rica, and it was before the internet. I didn't have a lot of confidence in investing in some kind of scheme like that. But it was a cool idea. However, if you want to make a creative display, why not reproduce the South? Get some loblolly pine seedlings and make a tree farm. It's not Japanese, but it is American. I have a slash pine. It's not in that book, but it's on my Mahogany Row Studio. That is a slash pine. It's got 19-inch needles. And everybody in Florida says, how do you make the needles on a slash pine get small? I said, why? They're gorgeous as long needles. I've created a new style. I call it the fireworks style. It grows up and the needles look like fireworks. And if you put that on your mind, and I'll tell you what, people that don't know bonsai, when they come into my garden, that's the #1 tree. They say, that is so cool. And the advantage of slash pine is I grew it from a seed. It's 21 years old. It's got bark equal to a 100-year-old Japanese black pine. They bark up so fast. So I think we'll conclude it. He mentioned food. He shouldn't have. He distracted me now. My tapeworm's acting up. So, yeah.
You have a picture of that pine on your...
If you go to Mahogany Row Studio, there should be one, yeah. If not, when I get home, I'll post a current picture. You're all welcome to friend me on Facebook. When a couple years ago, I had to delete all my international Facebook friends because of the government and security clearances and stuff, which was a bummer. I had 5,000 friends. It took me 4 evenings to do it. And a couple would send me emails, Rob, did I offend you? Why did you unfriend me? I said, I can't tell you why, but it's not because of you. But I would like this tree. I'd like that tree too, even though we can't work on it today. But
They have potential.
this one, they both have a lot of potential. I think this could be a more valuable tree than that. Because this,
Oh.
well, here's the reason I say that. I see a lot of crepe myrtles. And unless you go with a really big fat trunk, crepe myrtles to me aren't that impressive. This has so much happening right here. It's already phase 3. We just got to take it to phase 4. This is a long-term project. And in reality, as far as junipers go, it's pretty skinny. And it doesn't have the opportunity for a lot of deadwood. There's some. This could still be $4,000 or $5,000 tree in 5 years. It's not the end of the world. But you got to find somebody willing to buy it. That's the
Yeah.
That's the problem. And that, when I was BCI president, that was one of the big reasons why I try to get bonsai elevated to art. Because, for instance, what's another field where rich people, really wealthy people, spend money on something and don't even take care of them? Thoroughbred horses.
Koi.
What?
Oh.
Fish? Really? Okay. I don't think that's that common in the U.S., though, is it? Maybe.
I'm trying to, we have a koi and like fancy goldfish groups here in Texas. So we're trying to mirror up, because hypothetically, if you have koi fish, you tend to have a little bit more money. So we're trying to.
Well, not hypothetically. People with thoroughbred horses have more money. So my thinking was, if we could get people, patrons of the art, with lots of disposable cash, interested in trees, the whole art will rise. That's what Ryan Neal's trying to do. Otherwise, you starve as a bonsai artist. That's why I'm a rocket scientist and not a bonsai artist. I realized a long time ago it's tough to make money working on trees. The expression starving artist is there for a reason. So that's it for today. I hope I was entertaining and you learned something. Appreciate it.